Welcome to Learn React by Developing a Progressive Web App. My name is Vinod and I'll be your personal instructor for this course. In this course, we will be learning the basics of React.js by actually developing a real web application that allows the user to search for details of a movie. Not only that, we will also be deploying it on a platform called Firebase from Google so that anyone in the world can access your application. Let me show you the end product first. The website address is https://react.js-movie-browser.firebaseapp.com. You can actually visit the website right now. The home page has a picture of mine and has a search box on the top. When you enter a movie title or part of the movie title in the search box and then press Enter key or the return key, the application retrieves the list of 10 movies that contain the search term in their titles. For example, if I go here and then search for, say, baby and then press enter, you'll see that it displays the list of 10 movies that have the word baby in the title. If you click on a particular movie, it will also show you the details about the same thing. You also have a back button over here. You can also see when I click on a movie and if the movie has not been loaded yet, there'll be a progress indicator and then you get the movie. And you can click on the back button over here to go back to the previous page. You can also click on the title of our application, Movie Browser, to go back to the home page. Let me explain the high-level architecture of our application. Here you can see everything is done in your own laptop or PC. We would have installed something called Node.js, which acts as a platform for developing our applications. And we don't need Node.js platform on our machine once our application is ready and has been deployed. We use the Microsoft Visual Studio Code for editing our source code. Of course, you can choose a different IDE of your choice. However, Microsoft Visual Studio Code has been the number one when it comes to developing web applications. So the Node.js platform provides us a development web server. We will be deploying our application on the development server. So when you do that, your application will be running on a port 3000. And once your application is up and running, you can access your application using a browser, which is again running on your own laptop. So the browser on your laptop visits the local web server which is running on your laptop. And once that happens, the React.js application is shipped to your browser and then it is completely running on your browser. So there is no interactivity between the browser and the server from this point forward. However, when it comes to retrieving movie details, your application directly communicates to a third-party website called OMDB API.com, using which you will be able to display the details of the movie or list of movies in your application. Notice at this point in time, we are still in the development phase, so our application server is still running, but we don't need this once our application is completed. What we do once it is completed is we deploy our application onto a free hosting provided by Google called Firebase. Our application sits on the Google's cloud platform. Now, once your application is ready and deployed on Firebase, you can access that with a public URL. And any user who accesses this public URL, the actual React application is transferred from Google Firebase to the user's browser and then completely runs on the browser. There is no connection required to Firebase from that point forward. So the Firebase is only going to serve as a static HTTP server, nothing more than that. And the React application running on the client's browser now visits the OMDB API.com directly and gets all the movie details to show it on the client's machine. And notice that the user's laptop or PC don't have any Node.js dependency at all. So this is the high-level architecture of the application that we're going to build. In the next lecture, let's get started with React.js. In this video, let's have a quick intro on React.js. React.js is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces developed and maintained by Facebook. If you are looking at something called MVC, React.js addresses the view part of MVC. React makes it painless to create interactive user interfaces. You can design simple views for each state in your application, state being the data maintained by your UI, and React will efficiently update and render just the right components when your data changes. Using React, you can build encapsulated components that manage their own state, which is data, and then compose them into very complex user interfaces. Since a component logic is written in JavaScript instead of something like templates, which are like HTML snippets, you can easily pass rich data through your app and keep the state out of the actual DOM. To understand what component is all about, have a look at this application. And this is a movie browser application that we're going to develop. Here, the application is made up of lots of components. So you can think of the entire application itself as one component, which is made up of child components like header component, home component. When you're searching for movies, you get a list of movies that could be another component. And a movie list itself is made up of MovieCard components. And when you click on a particular movie, we want to get the details of the movie, and we have this movie details component over here. So effectively, you have a tree of components. So app is the component that has child components like header, home, movie list, movie details, etc. And movie list itself has another child component called movie card. So what does a component look like? In React.js, a component can be created in two ways. Number one is a class. Here is an example of a class app that extends component, which is provided by React.js. A class-based component in React.js has a function called render, which is automatically called by React.js library, which is supposed to return an HTML snippet in an XML format. Since we are combining the JavaScript and the XML in the same code, and this part is called as JSX. It's an XML within the JavaScript and not a string. Like you can see that we don't have any double quotes or single quotes over here. And this is going to be processed and rendered to the actual DOM. You can also create a component using a function, and the function just is an equivalent of the render function that we just now saw. It's supposed to return an HTML in the form of an XML, which is again a JSX over here. Now we can simplify this particular function into ES6 arrow function by removing the function keyword and adding an arrow here. So something that looks like this. So you have a const app. So the variable app here represents an entire function. In this case, it's an arrow function without parameters in this example. But eventually you may see that there could be some parameters also. So one thing that you may have to keep in mind is the name of the function or the name of the class that represents a component must start with a capital letter. Otherwise, you're going to get an error. So that's it for this video. In the next lecture, let's get started with developing React applications. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's see the software setup required for getting started with React.js. Number one is Node.js. Now, Node.js provides a platform where we can compile our JavaScript XML code into something that the browser understands, like the JavaScript. We also would like to have a development web server, which is actually written in Node.js, or you can say JavaScript. To process all these things, we need Node.js. Note that this is only a development requirement. That means once your application is built and ready to be deployed, you can deploy it on any server and has no dependency on Node.js at all. The current version is 13.11.0 at this point in time, but what we would like to do is to use the latest long-term support installation. So we're going to download this 12.16.1 LTS. I'm going to click on that. Depending on the operating system that you have, it appropriately downloads a relevant software. So in my case, because I'm using Mac OS, I'm getting a package file. I'm keeping it in my downloads, save it. Once the download is ready, let's click on that to open. So this is a simple wizard. Just go ahead and click on the continue button over here, accept the license agreement, and then choose the location. I would like to install this in the default location. I click on install, asking the root privileges or the administration privileges. I'm going to enter my password, and that's it. So click on close to come out of this. And it says that do you want the installation file that was downloaded from the net? Because we finished the installation, we don't need that. I can remove that and delete the same. Now let's open a terminal to see the same thing. On Windows, you open a command prompt and then check for the version of Node.js. I'm going to type here node-v or -- version, and it's going to say 12.16.1, which is the one that we downloaded and installed. Node.js also comes with two more utilities. One of them is called npm, which is the Node Package Manager. And this is used for installing the project dependencies. For example, if your React.js project depends on some third-party libraries like jQuery or Axios, so we might want to install them, and this is what actually comes to our help. So npm-v or -- version shows what's the version. I believe the 6.13.4 is not the latest version, so what we can do is we can upgrade the version of Node Package Manager using npm itself. So what we can do is we can type here sudo, and sudo is required only on Mac and Linux platforms, not on Windows. On Windows, simply type the command npm-g update and then type npm itself. So we are using npm to update a package called npm, and -g is for global, and that's the reason why we need this sudo on Mac and Linux. So I press enter, it's going to ask my password, and it's going to download the latest version of npm and update on my system. And now if I say here npm-v, we should see 6.14.2. Node.js also comes with another executable called npx, and this is used for running executables without having to install. In the earlier versions of React.js, we used to use a command line tool called create react app, and that has been deprecated, and you have to run it using this npx command, which we'll see in the next lecture. But just to have a look at what's the version we have here, npx-v, and it's 6.14.2. And that's about the Node.js installation and verification. Let's exit out of this. And the second software that we require to use is the editor, and there are many editors that are available. Officially, even Facebook also says that their developers use this particular software, which is, by the way, free from Microsoft. It's based out of another open source software called Atom. Based on your operating system, there's already a download button for you. In case if you have chosen something wrong, you can go and choose a different one. So all you have to do is to click on the download for your operating system, and that's going to download VS Code Darwin stable for me, and I've chosen the downloads location. It's a zip archive, so I can keep it wherever I want. Let's say, for example, I'm going to keep it on my desktop. I save, and once it's done, I'm going to open the same. So you can see that I got an executable directly here. On Windows, it might be a different set of files, but you will get the exe or executable. All I have to do is to double click the same thing. Now, typically, we would like to keep this in our applications folder on Mac. So I'm going to just drag this and drop it onto my applications. And then I'm going to release that. Since I already have this, it's going to ask me, do you want to keep both of them, or you want to stop the copying, or do you want to replace? I would like to replace that with the latest version. At this point in time, one thing I want to mention is that the software VS Code here is one of those softwares which are called evergreen softwares, which means once you install this, you don't have to worry about downloading and installing the latest version again, because every time you have an internet connection and you are opening the VS Code, automatically it checks for the update and installs the latest updates. So that being set up now, we are good to go with developing of a React.js application. So in the next lecture, let's create a brand new React application. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's create a brand new React.js application and see what are the things that are required to start it up. So I'm on my command prompt here, which is called terminal on Mac OS. And currently I'm on my home directory. I would like to switch to my desktop. I have absolutely no files on my desktop. So if you see here ls -l, I don't have anything over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new React.js application using the npx command. And the way you do is you type here npx space and then the command called create react app followed by the name of the application you want to create. Let's say the name of the application that I want to create is called as React Demo, and then press enter. This is going to create a bunch of source code, package.json. It's going to download the respective dependencies. As you can see, it's installing a dependency called React, React DOM, and React scripts. Now, if you compare this with other frameworks like Angular, which has got a huge list of dependencies, this is much lightweight. And one of the reasons for that happens to be that this addresses only the view part of MVC. And the installation may take a while, so I'm going to pause the video, and once the installation is complete, I'm going to continue the same. Alright, it took almost a minute for me to get this done, and as you can see, it says that it is finally successful. But if you see, there were lots of errors, but don't worry about that. That's because it's trying to install it using different extensions, but somehow finally it figured out to install the required packages. Now, the next set of commands they have given, very simple commands. It says that get inside your directory and then give these commands. Npm start for starting a development server. If you want to create a production build, you have here npm run build, run the test cases. If you have, you can say npm test, npm run eject. Basically converts that into a simple HTML JavaScript application, removing the React.js dependencies. At this point in time, let's not worry about any of them. We just want to clear the screen and note that I was on desktop. I'm still on desktop. But if I see now ls-l, I have a new folder called React Demo. So I'm going to cd into React Demo. And if I see ls-l over here, there is a bunch of files. Node modules is where we have all the dependencies that we just got installed. It's a huge directory. Don't worry, this is going to be only a development folder. When we create a production build, none of these matter. So we are going to have a smaller footprint anyways. Now, every dependency that you have right now, as well as that the one that you're going to have in the future, will be listed in the package.json. So that's important. Do not delete this file. The public folder contains a bunch of files like basic index.html, some fav icons and stuff like that. And that is required, so don't delete that. The bulk of the code that we are going to work with is going to be in SRC. So to see whether our application has successfully been created or not, let's just say npm start. That's all what we have to do. And what this is going to do is whatever the source code and public folder contains, it's going to combine that into an application, converts all the JSX code, which is a template that has come up automatically, into a runnable HTML JavaScript code and deploys it on the development server, and then that will be opened in a browser automatically. So all these things happen behind the scene just by typing npm start. So I'm going to press enter over here, and it says that starting development server, and you can see that it came up on localhost 3000. The first to load might be a little bit time taking, but after that you will see that everything runs very smooth. Now, if you are able to see this particular screen, that means your application is ready. It says here edit src/app.js and save to reload. That's all it says. Let's go and see if we can edit this src app.js, and will that be reflected over here. So let's go to Visual Studio Code. And in Visual Studio Code, I have here a button called Open Folder. If you're not seeing that, that's probably because it was collapsed. Click on this icon and you have an open folder. Click on the open folder and let's choose our desktop and then React Demo. I say open, and this is the content of our application folder. So under src, we have a file called app.js, and that's exactly what actually it asked me to edit. So I have a bunch of code over here. I'm just going to get rid of everything inside this, and I'm going to simply type here, say h1, and then I'll say hello React. I have enabled autosave on my Visual Studio Code. This ensures that every piece of code that I'm typing is automatically saved. Sometimes we forget to save this and then it's not reflected. but it also recompiles all our JavaScript XML code and then redeploys every time I'm making some changes. If you want to avoid that, you untick this and then save it manually. So now that I've removed this, every time I make some changes, for example, I'm going to remove this line by pressing Ctrl X. And now I have to save this manually and then go back to the browser. And you can see it simply says Hello React. So that's it for this lecture, where we saw how to create a new React.js application. In the next lecture, let's clean up and refactor our application. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's do some cleanup and refactoring of our application. There are a lot of code that we got earlier. For example, app.js is the one that is being used by my index.js, and the index.js is the starting point. So if I go to index.js, you can see here it says some import React from React, and this line is required whenever you have some JSX. If you don't have JSX, it's not a requirement at all. Now, anything that looks like an XML inside of your JavaScript, and that's basically a JSX. The second import here says React DOM from a package called React DOM over here, and that's used because we have here something called React DOM.render. So what's basically happening is that we are asking React.js to look for this element in our index.html, and the index.html is inside the public folder over here. And in the index.html, you can see there are lots of comments. We can get rid of all the unwanted comments. Let's come back to these comments later. So if you remove all the comments from here, the actual code looks very, very simple. It just has a body/body with a div whose ID is root. And this is exactly what we are looking for in our index.js, where we say, hey, there is an element whose ID is root. Render this particular component called app. That's all this line is all about. And this particular component is coming from another file here, and you can see dot slash. Dot slash means in the working directory there is a file called app. React.js looks either for a file called app.js or app.jsx. Now, since we have an app.js over here, whatever is exported from there will be used as a component. And in this example, you can see that there is a component written using a function. And I mentioned earlier that we can use a class. There's a difference between using a class and a function, and there is a scenario where you may have to use only class-based components, and there is a scenario where you may use the function-based components. Now, for practical reasons, they are called as stateful and stateless respectively. So this is a stateless component. So we will come back and discuss about the components and how do we write our own components in a few minutes later. But basically index.js is trying to create a component using the code given in that particular file. And then there is one more here called ServiceWorker.unregister, and this would be changed to ServiceWorker.register when we look into the PWA part of our application, the progressive web application. For the time being, kindly ignore this part. All right, so now we don't want a couple of things. For example, I don't want this logo.svg. It's an image that was rotating earlier. I don't need the index.css. I don't need the app test.js, app.css. I don't need the setup test.js. So all these files which came up earlier, I don't need. I'm going to right click on them and then delete them. I selected them by using the command key and click on that. On Windows, you can hold the control key and keep clicking all the files that you want to delete. And then I'm going to delete them. It's going to confirm. I say yes. And this actually causes a problem. If you see that right now, it's giving me an error. And it says that, hey, there is no such file called app.css. That's because in my app.js, it's being referenced. So let's do that cleanup. So if I go to app.js, there is an app.css. We don't need this anymore. I'm going to press Command X. On Windows, you press Control X to delete that entire line. And in the index.js, we are using something called index.css, which is no longer there. So we can remove that. Now we are ready to run the server again. All I have to do is to save the files that I have over here. And then if I go back to the browser, you should now see that it says hello React. My styling is gone, but the application is still running. One last thing that we will do is to organize all our components inside a folder called components, so we can easily identify where are our components, because eventually you're going to have lots and lots of files. It's a good idea to arrange them in a folder. So I'm going to create a folder under SRC called components. I can click on this icon over here to say new folder, or I can right click here and then say new folder. And the name of the folder, I want to call it as components. And once it's done, I'm going to drag and drop this app.js inside that particular folder. So I'll say move, and VS Code also says, hey, you may have used app.js in multiple places. Do you want to update that? I'll say yes. And if I go back to the index.js now, it should ideally have said /component/app automatically got updated. Let's save this and see if that is reflected in our application on the browser. And you can see the application is working perfectly all right. One other thing that we will do before we conclude this particular lecture is to set up a VS Code extension. So click on this icon over here, which is a bunch of extensions that VS Code allows us to add. There are lots and lots of extensions that are available on the net. Some of them have been already installed on my VS Code. All you do is to search for the word React.js. So if I'm looking for React, you can see that I already have got this React Native, React Redux snippets for ES6, ES7. Now this is something that I've been using it from quite some time, and I'm okay with this. Very useful snippets are defined over here. For example, by simply typing the word IMR and pressing enter, you should get the import React, IMRO, IMRC, something useful like CCS, which creates a component class. There are lots and lots of them out there, but I'm only going to use few of them. So all you have to do is to click on the install button when it's available over here. Make sure that you have selected React Native, React Redux snippets. You may wish to explore other extensions also, but I'm not using them in my training here. But if you want to follow along with me, this is what I'm using. Now once you install that, now you can work with this. So let's just check it out how this works. I'm going to go back to my app.js. I'm going to delete this line and then simply type here IMR and then press enter. And you can see we got this import React from React. Now if I want to convert this into a class-based component, I'm going to delete the entire function app and the export default. And then I'll simply type here CCS, press enter. You can see automatically it picks up the name of the class from the name of the file. And the file name and the class name, we generally keep it same, although that is not necessary. However, the class name must start with a capital letter, that's important. Extends component, and note that the component did not come over here. So instead of this, which I got from IMR, I'll type here IMRC and press enter. And we got this import React and component from React. And it has got something called state. At this time, we don't need that. But let's say, for example, I would like to have here a message as a variable. And then let's give it as hello React and put a couple of exclamations so that we know that the message is coming from here. And there is a render function for every component class, which is supposed to return a JSX. And you see that it's giving an error here saying that, hey, you didn't return anything. So to return something, I'm going to just type a div. And then inside the div, I'm going to type your h1. And inside a curly bracket, I would like to type this.state.message. Now you can see that the curly bracket here is to get the value of a variable inside this particular XML. Please note that you cannot write a JavaScript expressions like for loops or if condition inside this. It's only to substitute the value of a variable that we use this particular curly bracket. It's an interpolation that we are doing over here. A member of the class is always accessed using this keyword. So since state is a member variable of this particular class, a member function can access that using the this keyword. So we say this.state, and that has a variable called message or property called message, which has a value of hello React. So that's what actually we are trying to print inside this h1. So as soon as I save this, and if I go back to the browser, I should now see hello React with those 3 exclamations. That's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's add some Bootstrap CSS framework. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's have a look at how to beautify our application using a CSS framework called Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a framework developed by developers at Twitter, and it's the most popular CSS framework used and loved by millions of developers. Now, there are a couple of different ways to add this to your application. Number one, you can go to the download section over here, and they have given how you can include this into your application. They're given here compiled CSS and JavaScript files. You can download this as a zip file and then use them. Alternately, you can refer to a CDN, which is the Content Delivery Network. That means your application refers to a CSS file hosted by a third-party website. Then you can also use npm install Bootstrap and then start using the same thing in your application. But all these files refer to the default styling provided by Bootstrap, which is okay to some extent, but if you want to have more colorful UIs, you may have to tweak the CSS. The good news is there is a website called Bootswatch, and there are many such Bootstrap themes are available. But this is the one that I've been using it for quite some time, and I'm quite happy with this. But the usage remains the same thing. So if I scroll down over here, you can see that they have given different themes. You'll be using the same CSS class names provided by the Bootstrap. Because these themes have modified the CSS, you will see the same application looking completely different. So what you can do is you can choose the one that looks nice to you, and then you can just download that file and then keep it in your public folder. For example, I would like to use this for this demonstration. All I have to do is to click on the download button. It's going to download the bootstrap.min.css file, and on my desktop I have this React demo folder. Inside that you can see there's a public folder, and I'm going to just keep that file bootstrap.min.css right inside that. Click on save, and then come back to my VS Code, go to the index.html and refer to this bootstrap min.css. So I can go and add a link tag somewhere in the beginning. So I'll add right here, link, and then press enter. Note that I have not used a less than symbol, so VS Code automatically adds the link tag with the relevant attributes, and the href corresponds to the file. So I just have to say here either // or I can simply type bootstrap.min.css. As soon as I save this, the application is ready. So if I go back to the browser and look at my application, you can see that the background color has been changed. The font of this also has changed. That's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's start building our application by creating components. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's create a component called header and then use the same thing in our app.js. So for that, let's go to the components folder, create a new file here called header.jsx. You may keep the extension as .js, but with the .jsx extension, VS Code helps us automatically create HTML tags. We'll see that in a minute. So let's start by giving the header.jsx as the file name. Press enter. For this particular example, I want to create a class-based component, which is also called as stateful component. Let's start by typing imrc, and that's going to import the default exported member as React and a named member called component from this particular module. Apart from that, we simply have to type ccs to create a class-based component. This actually uses the name of the file, which is header.jsx. It takes the base name header and creates a class called header that extends component. There is a state I don't need state for this particular example. And then we are going to have a render function to return in XML, which is actually an HTML in XML syntax. Let's add a div here with a couple of class names from Bootstrap. So the way you can do is you can simply type .alert dash primary. Now note that we are going to get an HTML syntax like div class name equals to alert primary, and then the cursor is going to be waiting inside this. Now this is possible because we have given the file name extension as .jsx, but if you have given .js, then you have to ensure that at the bottom right side here there is a JavaScript React. If you click on that, you can see that there are many other options available. You have to manually choose JavaScript React. But because the extension is .jsx, it has automatically taken that. So coming back over here, I'm going to just erase this and type Y again, and you can see we get this .alert.primary. When I press enter, you may observe one small difference over here. Typically in HTML, we type CSS class reference as class. That means we would have said div class equals to. But since class is a keyword in JavaScript XML, we can't use the class keyword over here. Now, if I type class accidentally because I copied from somewhere else this entire snippet, you may have to manually change each one of them into class name. Otherwise, you get warnings. In the earlier versions of React.js, it used to be an error. Now it's considered as a warning because the React.js compiler has matured over a period in time. So anyway, we got this class name equals to this. I'm going to press enter, and inside this I'm going to add one more div, this time a class called container. So what container does is it's going to give a fixed width of around 1100 pixels. So I'm going to leave that as it is. And inside this I want to have a h1 that simply says movie browser. So I'm going to say here h1 movie browser. Now the file header.jsx has been created. It exports a component over here, but it's never being used anyway. So to use the same thing, I go back to the app.js and let's get rid of this h1, and in place of that h1, I want to include the header.jsx. So I can say here simply header like this, and then press enter. You can see it says auto import header from the /header. And that's nice because now we didn't have to do that manually. So as soon as I save this file, if I go back to the browser, you can see that we have a nice header which says here a movie browser. In our application, we are also going to provide a search box over here that allows us to search for movies. Even though we're not going to add any functionality to that feature, we'll just add a text box that looks nice and that allows us to type in something so that we can search for that movie. Let's go back over here. In the header.jsx, we want to have a text box also. Now to arrange the text boxes nicely, what we can do is we can divide this entire section from here to the other end. We want to divide that into two columns. So Bootstrap CSS framework allows us to create a row with multiple columns. Let's have a look at that. I'm going to remove this h1 from here right now. And then I'm going to create a class here called .row, which contains a child with a class name of call md4. Now this is to say that I want a column for a medium device. It should occupy 4 grids. Now Bootstrap comes with a concept of a grid system, so where a row is made up of 12 grids, and this one is going to occupy 4 grids in a medium device. Now if you may ask what's the medium device, Bootstrap also considers 4 different kinds of devices: an extra small device or XS that represents mobile devices. You may have a smaller devices, which is not a mobile phone, but probably you have a smaller iPad, for example, or a bigger phones. They are small device or SM. And then medium devices such as your laptop screens or computer monitors. But then there is one more called LG for large, so which is meant for high resolution, bigger screens. So you have XS, SM, MD and LG. So MD means MD and LG also. If you give here SM, then it's going to be SM, MD and LG. Anyways, at this time we want to target our laptop screens. We are also going to see how this is going to look in a mobile device. But anyway, so this is the first column of my row where our h1 is going to appear. We also want one more, so I'm going to say plus dot call dash md dash the remaining 8 out of 12. Now you can see here it's going to show how this is going to come up eventually. So it says div class name of row, and that's this part. Greater than means these are two child elements. Plus indicates it's the child. Now if you want to add another child for this, you may want to group them using a bracket. So at this time, let's keep it simple. So we have a dot row greater than dot call dash md4 plus another column with 8 grids on a medium device. So I press enter, and now we see we got a div with 2 more divs as child divs. And as in the earlier case, I'm going to just press enter here and then add that h1. I think it's called movie browser, and that's fine. If I go back here, you won't see much difference. But if I add a text box over here, you should see some difference. I'm going to just type here input. So that's the text box. If you want it as a search box, you can type :search. So that's going to give you an input type is equal to search with a class name of form-control. That's what we want to have. This is again a class name from Bootstrap. And this is going to nicely style that. It's going to occupy the full width. Plus it's also going to give you a proper padding, border, etc. So it's nice. I'm going to press enter. We're not going to give any name or ID for any of these things at this point in time. So let's just ignore that. This is a dummy text box at this point in time. You can add something like placeholder equals to and then say search ... and save this. If I go back to the browser now, you can see here that there is a movie browser with a search box right there. And because h1 is a bit bigger compared to this, you'll see that it's kind of aligned towards the top. So instead of h1, let's go and make this as h3. So I'm going to select this once and then press Command D to select the second one. On Windows, press Ctrl D. You'll see both the h1s are selected and cursor is blinking at both the places. I can simply type h3 now, and then it gets reflected in both the places as well. So I'm going to save it, go back to the browser, and now we can see it looks pretty neat. So movie browser, that's our h1. Starting from here till here, it's the 4 grids, and from here till here is the remaining 8 grids. So 1 row with 2 columns. And that's it for this lecture, where we created a header component and added to our application. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's create another component called home component. For that, let's go to the components folder, create a new file called home.jsx. And this time, unlike the header.jsx where we created a class-based component, we'll create a function-based component. Let's use imr snippet to get the import React from React. We need this for JSX. We won't be requiring the component because we're not creating a class that inherits from component. But instead, let's create a function called home, which takes, as of now, no parameters, but this could take some parameters also. And this has a return statement that consists of a div/div. Finally, we have to do an export, and then we say default home. So when we use the import statement in, for example, app.js, that we want to get everything from home, this is what actually is imported. Now, instead of creating a function using the function keyword, we can use the ES6 arrow functions for this. So I'm going to remove this function and say const, and this becomes a variable now. I have to assign something to that. And what I'm going to assign is supposed to be a function, and all I have to do is to give the parameter list and an arrow in the form of equals to greater than. So now this becomes a very simple function. And in case if the function has only a return statement and nothing else, you can simply use this return statement itself as the body of this particular function, like this. Now this is the more simpler approach, saying that, hey, this is a function named with a variable called home, and then we are exporting that home here. Now let's add some content inside our home. So if I go back to the view here, so basically in this component I want to have three different sections or three columns, where the first and the last column is just a dummy, and the center section is where I would like to have some kind of a photograph and a heading, probably some description. So to do that, let's go back and add a class name of row here. Make sure you use class name and not class, like this. And this is going to have three columns. Now I can say .col-md4, which means in a medium device it's going to occupy 4 grids. But in an extra small and a small device, I want this to occupy the full width. So I can say .col-xs12. And I want 3 of them. So I'm going to multiply that with 3. So you can see here, we're going to get 3 divs with the exact same class names. I'm going to press enter and we got 3 different divs over here. Like I said, the first one and the last one, I want this to be just a dummy div. The center section is what I want to use here. Let's copy and paste an image from one of my folders. So I'm going to go into my Finder. I have here a pictures folder. I have a bunch of my pictures over here. I'm going to select one of them. So this is the one that I'm going to use. I'm going to right click and copy this picture. And then on my desktop, I have here React demo application. And I'm going to copy and paste that in the public folder, create a new folder called images. And then inside that, I'm going to paste it. Now that's named as Vinod-4. So I'm going to rename this as Vinod.jpg. So it's been copied to my public folder over here under images. I have this picture and I'm going to use that picture right here. So I'll say img and src equals to /images/vinod.jpg. Alt probably is my name, Vinod Kumar Kayarthaya. And then I can also add some class names to that. So let's add a class name called img thumbnail. Let's also add some headings right below that. I'm going to say here h3, let's say movie browser application. And then I can say here a paragraph that says powered by React.js 16.13.0, and that's the version that we are using. One more thing I want to do is to align the content inside this div in the center. So I can simply type here text center. We now have a new component that has a bunch of content, but we haven't used it anywhere here. So now remember, the whole page here is a result of the component called app that currently has only the header as a child. So what we want to do now is to go to the app.js where we just have the header. Now we can just add one more here saying I have a component called home that I want to use. So it is automatically imported from the home.jsx. Let's save this, go back to the browser, and you can see that we got the movie browser app homepage. So that's it for this lecture. We created a home component, which is a function-based component. This is also called as a stateless component. You create a arrow function, assign that to a variable, and then export the same thing. Welcome back. Since our application is about movies, we want to display data related to movies that the user is going to search. We need the data from an external source which has the up-to-date information about movies. And there is an API called OMDB API. So visit the website called omdbapi.com and you will be landed over here. And this particular API can give you various information about a movie that you are looking for. And this has got a couple of usage information. For example, I can just send this request http://www.omdbapi.com/API-Key equals to your API key. So you need to acquire an API key first. And once you got this, you can put this ampersand and then use certain parameters to get details. For example, you can use this I to get the movie information based on the IMDb ID, or you can use a T based on the movie title. Now this is going to give you a single movie. In case if you're using the parameter I, then of course you're giving an IMDb ID, which is a specific ID for a specific movie. So there's an exact match or no match. But if you give a title, then probably the first best matched movie will be retrieved for. But in case if you are searching for a bunch of them, then you use the parameter called S and then give the search keyword that you're looking for. For example, here if I had said T equals to iron, then I would have got the first best match for the word iron in the title, so probably an Iron Man, whichever the release. However, by using this S equals to iron, I will get the first 10 best matched movie list. And of course, if you want more, you can get a different page by typing the page number. Some examples over here. So you can search for a movie. This is by title. If I type here iron and then click on search, I should get only one single movie. Probably that did not match a particular movie. So I'm going to type here Iron Man and then click on search. You can see that we got a response consisting of the title Iron Man over here. Whereas if I give a Iron Spaceman, I would get probably a different movie which contains the word or the phrase Iron Man in the title. Here I'm only going to get a single result. The best way to explore this is to get your own API key and then get the details of the movies that you want. That's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's obtain an API key for ourselves. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's obtain an API key for ourselves. All you have to do is to go to the website omdbapi.com, and in the header somewhere here you see that there is an API key, so click on that. So here is a section that says generate API key, account type Patreon or free. So let's select the free for now, and if you are happy, please go ahead and pay some money and then get more limits. Give your email ID. So for example, I am going to type here vinod@gmail.com, and first name, last name. For example, I'm going to say Vinod Kumar, and then I'll say testing and click on submit to send these details. After a while, you should receive an email to the specified email over here, and all you have to do is to get that. Since I've already got my API key, this is how the email that would come up and show you. So here is your API key. So this is the AA9E49F. That's the ID or the API key. And then they are given here some examples saying that, hey, this is how you can send a request. OMDBAPI.com I equals to. This is supposed to be the IMDb ID of the movie, and this is my API key. So I can just click on this to open that in a new tab, and you can see we got some Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. In case if I want to search for something, I can remove this, and probably at the end I can add here ampersand S equals to Iron plus Man. That's going to be like Iron Spaceman. And when I press enter, it's going to give me a bigger list, probably 10 movies with some search as the key and an array of all the movies that we are actually going to get. Note that for each of the movie, there is a title, there is an year, there's an IMDb ID, then there is a type, which is either movie or a television series. Then you have the poster as the content. So this details is there for every movie. So this is what we want to use, and then display the movie poster along with the title and probably an year, and clicking on which I should get more details, for which I can use this IMDb ID and then send another request to get more details of that movie, such as actors, directors, what is the production, what is the description of that, what category that it belongs to, etc. So that's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's build a component to display a movie card. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's create a movie card that displays a single movie and its title probably along with an year. A card layout is something that looks like this. Here is an example from a website called bigbasket.com. where you can see a picture, some details about that, and some call to action buttons over here. So this, if I have, I can repeat the same thing for multiple movies. And this is the reason why I wanted to pick up the card layout. And the card layout can be created easily using the Bootstrap CSS framework. So I can go to my documentation over here and then look for card. And you can see that there is a bunch of options that pop up. I say cards, and now I get the documentation for the cards over here. So Bootstrap out of the box, just making use of some divs and some built-in CSS class names, allows us to create an image, and right below that there is a card title, and then there is a bunch of description, some call to action. In our case, the call to action probably need not be there because I can click on this entire card anywhere to get the details of the same movie. So we have here a div class of card. There's a style that is given here, which is fixing the width to be some 18 rem. We want this to be automatically calculated based on our row column combination, but for the time being, let's keep that with us. You can see that there is an img src equals to, and then there is a class name of card img top. We can swap that along with this to interchange the image and the readable section of your card if you want. Basically, that's what we want. So we want to create a div that has a card as a class name, img with card img top, and then we have a card body with a card title and card text. So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and create a new component under components folder. And this time I'm going to call this as MovieCard.jsx. And this is also going to be a function based or stateless component. As much as possible, we would like to avoid the stateful components, and that's a good practice because state means data. Instead of keeping the data in the component, we can externalize that to some other stores. That's where the concept of Redux or hooks comes into picture. So I'm going to type here IMR for getting the React from React, and then I'm going to create a const movie card, and that's going to be my component. So I'm going to assign an empty bracket and an arrow function over here. Return a div class name equals to card and /div, put a semicolon, and of course export default movie card. So this is our actual movie card component. Since we want to display details of a movie here, let's create a variable called movie. So I'm going to say here const movie equals to, and then I'm going to grab one of the movie from here. So I've already selected from this curly bracket to the end of the curly bracket. I'm going to copy that and then paste as an object. Note that the whole thing is a JSON object over here with the movie.title as Iron Man, movie.year 2008, and so on and so forth. Now we want to make use of that over here. So I'm going to have the img src equals to, and I want the movie.poster to be the source. So since I want the value of a variable and not a hard-coded string, I need to remove these double quotes and then add a curly bracket, and then I'll say here movie.poster like this. So we have a movie, we got the movie.poster, and that becomes the source. We also have to give an alternate text as a good practice. So let's add the title as the alternate text. So I'm going to remove these double quotes and then put a curly bracket. I'll say here movie.title as the value for that. Importantly, it's supposed to have a class name of card img top, and that's what actually is the CSS class we saw over here. Here it is. And then we're going to have a card body consisting of card title and card text. So let's add here a dot card body greater than card title plus card text. So I'm going to press enter to have that structure. The card title, I just want the movie title. I'm just going to copy this and then paste over here. This is going to be just the year, so I'll just change this to year. So I'm going to save this, but we never used this movie card anywhere. So for the time being, let's go to app.js and then comment or remove this home for now, and then add here MovieCard. So I'm going to add here MovieCard slash, so we got a single MovieCard. So if I save this and go back to my application browser here, you can see that we got a big poster, and right at the bottom we got the Iron Man and 2008. Now we wanted to have a smaller section, so that's where there was an initial width was mentioned over here. You can see that there is a width. Let me copy this for now and then change this later. So I go back to MovieCard, add a style along with this like this. So if I save this and go back to the browser, go back to our application, you can see we got an error. So the error here, it says the style prop expects a mapping from style properties to values, not a string. So this is a little strange because this is how we give it in HTML. But remember, this is an XML and this is also special to React.js. Now what it's actually expecting here is an object. So assume that you have an object called st. So it could be something like st, where the style object could be something like this pattern, and a width is a property, and then a value probably is, let's say for example, 200 px or pixel. So this is an object, and that object is what we are giving over here. As soon as I save it and go back to the browser, you can see we got a movie like this. Now obviously we didn't want that to be having a fixed width. We wanted to make sure that we have, let's say for example, 4 or 3 movies in one row. So we can to have the row and column combination, and that we will do in the next lecture. So if I want to swap the title along with the image or poster, so all you have to do is to bring this down, use the Alt key on Windows, Option key on Mac, and then pull down using the down arrow key, and you can see that we swapped the card body along with the card image. Let's also increase the width of this to say 250 pixel. Save this, go back to the browser, and you now see the title is on the top, and then we have here the year, and then we have the poster at the bottom. Also, to distinguish between the title and the year, we can have here h5 instead of a div. You can give h3, h1, whatever that suits best. Go back and you can see it's a little bigger than the regular text. Also, instead of just a div, I can make this as a paragraph by adding a p instead of a div. And that's what actually was recommended anyway in the Bootstrap documentation. So now we have our card ready. Let's use the same thing to create a movie list component. So that's it for this lecture. See you in the next one. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's create a movie list component that has probably a bunch of movies as data. And for every movie, we want to display a movie card, which we have created in the previous lecture. So to do the same thing, let's go to our VS Code, create a new component under components folder. Let's call it as MovieList.jsx. And let's keep a class-based component because we want to maintain some data as a state here. I'm going to type here imrc to get React and component from React, and then type ccs to create a class-based component. So it borrows the name from the file name. That's why the name of the file is important. We give it in the proper Pascal casing here. This time we have the state. We're going to call this as movies. And let's keep it a simple array for this time. And then in the render function, let's return a simple div for the time being. So I'm going to just add here div/div. Now for the time being, let's copy and paste some hard-coded values from the browser here. So we have the list of movies, all the movies that are there. I want the entire array over here. So this square bracket to the end of it. So I'm going to copy everything and then come back and then paste over here. But eventually we want to get this data using Ajax. So we'll do that a bit later. So we got all the 10 movies in one single array object over here. So what I want is I want to loop over this movies array, and for every movie inside that collection I want to get one card. So the way we would probably think of doing it is, okay, let's add here a section like this and then put a for loop or a movies.forEach and then convert each movie into a movie card. But the curly bracket here is not for JavaScript constructs like if conditions or for loop. So the only thing that you can do is put some variables which represents probably an array of JSX. So the way you can handle this situation is you have to use the movies.map function. Movies being an array, it has a function called map that can convert an object into something else, and that something else would be a movie card component. So the way you do is you come here and then say this.state.movies, which is an array, and then you say .map. Map takes a callback where you will be getting a movie object, and in turn you have to return something else, and that something else is going to be a movie card. So I'm going to type here movie card like this. So we get one movie and we are returning a movie card. So the map function, since it is giving you one at a time, it's going to collect this one at a time. At the end of it, it's going to return an array of movie card objects. So map generally does the transformation. So I can call this as a variable here. For example, I can say const movie list equals to something like this. So I can now copy this and then give that inside this particular curly bracket. So the curly bracket is an expression now. So it represents a variable, and the variable is nothing but an array of movie cards. So while this is what you have to do in effect, there is one more thing that we have to do. We have to supply this movie object to this movie card so that the movie card can display that details. We'll do that in a minute. Just to make sure that we get this properly done, let's also add a class name of row here. And let's go to the movie card component, which is here. Let's get rid of the style. We don't need this style anymore. But instead, we're going to surround the whole thing in another div with a column. So I'm going to type here div class name equals to call dash md dash, let's say I want 3 movies in a row. So I can say here dash 4 and then slash div, and inside that I'm going to paste the whole thing. If you want to format the code here, you can press Alt Shift F on Windows, Option Shift F on Mac, and the code gets formatted like this. So save this card. MovieList has been saved already, but MovieList has never been used anywhere. So I'm going to go to app.js and remove the movie card, and instead of that I'm going to put the MovieList. Before that, let's also add a class of container. So that's going to give you the fixed width, and since this is not a .jsx, type manually div class name equals to container, and inside that I'm going to type here MovieList component. So as soon as I save this, and if I go back to the browser, go to our application, you can see that I have 10 movies, and for every movie the Iron Man movie is repeatedly being displayed. Of course, what we want to do now is to pass the individual movie in the array to the movie card, so movie card can grab that information and then present the same thing over here. So that's it for this MovieList component. In the next lecture, let's see how we can pass the value from MovieList to movie card. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's see how a parent component can pass the values to child component. For example, we have the MovieList component as the parent, which is making use of movie card as the child component, and we want to pass a movie object from the MovieList to movie card. So for that, you go back to our MovieList, and here is where I have instantiated a movie card, and I have this variable m here which is never being used. So this is the function argument for my callback, and I have to supply this. And since we are using like HTML tags, you can supply this m as HTML attributes. For example, I can type here movie equals to, and then say here m, So which means that we are just supplying the variable m as a parameter to this movie. Now this could be anything, so since it represents one movie, I just gave it like that, nothing else. So now that we are passing here, we should also be receiving the same in MovieCard, and in MovieCard we now can have a variable called movie. So if you go back to the MovieCard, we already have a variable called movie that is over here. I don't need this anymore, so I'm going to get rid of that. But if I get rid of that, that will be an error here because there is no variable called movie. Now this is where this function parameter comes into picture. Now from the movie list, which is the parent, I can pass as many attributes I want here. All the attributes that I pass from here will be received here as one single object, typically named as props. Props because it's like properties. But that's the general convention that React.js follows. It's called props. And now I can say here props.movie.title, props.movie.year, props.movie.title again, props.movie.poster here. But in order to avoid the use of props.everywhere, what I can do is I can say here let movie equals to props. Now this is an ES6 object destructuring mechanism where the object props has a property or variable called movie inside that. We are creating a new local variable called movie, and that movie is going to be used everywhere here. So this is the object destructuring. Let's go save this MovieCard and then MovieList and then come back to our application. Now you should see that all the movies are different here now because it's supplied, and for every movie supplied, it's displaying the respective details over here. One more thing that we can do in the MovieCard here is we are doing an object destructuring over here. Instead, we can do that object destructuring over here itself. All you have to do is to copy this and then replace this over here, so we don't need this line anymore. So in other words, whatever the object that is coming as a parameter, from that object we are only interested in the movie attribute. So if I save this, go back, I should still see the same result, no change. One more thing that you also should see is by going to the developer console. So you can go to view, developer, there's a developer tools or JavaScript console. Let's go to the console here. You can see we get an error. It says that each child in a list should have a unique key prop. And that is coming because in the MovieList.jsx line number 8, so if I go back over there, MovieList.jsx line number 8, here is a map that we are doing. So the map actually trying to convert a single movie object into a movie card. So eventually it's going to give you a collection of movies. So it says that the collection of JSX must have a unique ID called key. So we need to define a property called key equals to and some unique number. Now I can give any number I have uniquely. For example, while the map gives you not only the movie object, it also gives the index. We didn't collect that. If I wanted, I could have put a bracket here and put m index and then I can supply. But since I know that the movie object has a unique ID called IMDB ID, I can just use the same thing. So I can type here m.imdb ID, and that's the property that we have there. I save it, come back to the browser. You can see that our error is gone. One more thing that you can see is that it says that st is assigned a value but never used. Home is defined but never used. Movie card is defined but never used. These are some of the unused variables. Let's clean up that also. So in here, movie card, we had this variable st. We don't need this. I'm going to get rid of that. Save it. In the app.js, we have the home and movie card. We don't need this, at least for the time being. Later, we're going to add that. So I'm going to remove that from there. Save it. Come back to the browser. You can see the warnings have gone. So that's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's get the actual movie details from the OMDB API instead of hard-coded values using Ajax. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's try to get the movies from the net using OMDBAPI.com as well as Ajax. For this, we want to use a third-party API called Axios. You can use jQuery or the built-in JavaScript fetch API if you want, but Axios is much simpler to use. So let's go and see how to use the same thing. So I'm going to go back to my command prompt and go to a new tab. And in the new tab, make sure that I'm in the right working directory, which is my React demo on desktop. I have to type npm I for install and then type Axios. And this is going to take a minute or less, and installs Axios dependency for our project that updates the package.json as well. You can ignore these errors because at the end of it, it's going to install in some different means. And you can see that Axios 0.19.2 version has been added to my project. I can just come back here, look at the package.json, and you can see that it has added the Axios API to my project dependency list as well. Let's come back to our movie list, and this is where I have the movie list. I don't want this array anymore, so I'm going to remove this from here to the end and put an empty bracket because that's what we want right now. So we just have an empty array. So if I save it, you can see that the movie list is gone because we don't have any movies, but we want to get the movies from the internet. So this is where I'm going to write a function called fetch movies. You can name it anything you want, equals to, and then you can write an arrow function like this. So let's assume that the search keyword that we have here, let's call it a search text, equals to, let's say instead of Iron Man, I'm going to type Spider-Man. This is the search text. For the time being, I'm hard coding it, but eventually we want to be able to type in over here and get the details from that. So for the time being, let's keep it as hard coded value here. I'm going to type here Axios, which is supposed to be imported from the Axios module, dot get. You can see that there is a bunch of functions like get, post, put, delete, etc. based on HTTP request methods. You can call one of them. So I want to make a get request this time. And the URL here is supposed to be omdbapi.com along with my API key. I need to search for this particular text. So I'm going to use the ES6 template string over here by using a backquote. Note that it is not a single quote, it is backquote. It is the key below the escape key on your keypad. It is the same thing as the tilde, but without shift. And here is where I want to type http://www.omdbapi.com/ and then you type here question mark API key equals to whatever the API key that I have. So I'm going to copy that API key from here. In fact, I can copy the whole string from here and replace this entire stuff. And the only thing that I have to change is that S equals to, instead of Iron Man, I want this search text. So I'm going to type here $search text. That's the variable that I have. So this is the advantage of using the template string, where we can embed value from another variable and build a new string here, right? So now that we got this axios.get, this returns a promise, but when the promise is resolved, we get the actual response. So let's see, we get the response, but for the time being, I just want to do a console log. I'm going to do a console log of resp. Now, in case if you want to just display using a console log of whatever that you received, you can simply type here console.log, because this is nothing but a function that receives a parameter and prints it on the screen. So I'm going to put a semicolon. Notice that this function is never called, so we need to call this at some point in time. So for the time being, I'm going to go to the render function here and then call this.fetchMovies. So any member, you should always refer to that using this. So I'm going to save this, go back to the browser, go to my application. I don't see anything over here, but if I go to the developer console or JavaScript console by going to view developer JavaScript console, you should now see that there is a object being displayed. That object is the result of console log, and it has a member called data. Now this is the standard convention Axios follows. Whatever the response body is there, that's coming as data, and then there is a status 200, status text okay. if I expand this data, you will see that there is a search which is an array of 10 movies over here. And it also says that there is a total result of 197 movies with the Spider-Man as the title. So we are interested in this data. So now we can say that, hey, whenever you get the response, you give me the response dot data. So that's going to be my return value from here. And this being a promise, I can again say here dot then. Now when I get the data, I'm more interested in the data dot search, and that's going to be my movies. I can say here data dot search. So now that the data dot search represents an array, I can say dot then. I will call that as movies, and now I have to take that movies and pass it on to the state, and state is immutable, so which means you can't simply say this dot state dot movies equals to movies. This is wrong. If you assign a value to this movies, its value gets changed, but the render function is never invoked again. So it's only the state being changed inside the object, inside your component, but it doesn't reflect on the browser. So if you want this render function to be invoked again because there is a change in the data, what you have to do is you say this dot set state, and then you say that, hey, there is a state called movies. So that's what we want to assign. So you can say movies colon movies because we are receiving movies over here, and movies colon movies can be short formed into just movies. So this dot set state of movies. Now because we are calling a function, not only that it assigns a value to this, but it is also going to call the render function again. And notice that in the render function, we are actually making use of that movies, and then we are constructing an array of movie cards. And that is the reason why you have to call the set state and not assign it directly. There is one big problem in this particular code as of now. Notice that when the render function is called for the first time, we are calling the fetch movies. The fetch movies is going to make use of this Axios to get the data. When the movies is available, it's going to change the set state, and the set state will invoke this render again. And this goes on forever, and you will have a problem. So because this leads to recursion, let's not give this over here, but instead let's go and add another lifecycle function which is called component did mount. So a component did mount is a lifecycle function which is called exactly once for the component when it is initially rendered. So here is where we say this dot fetch movies. So first time component did mount is going to invoke the fetch movies. The fetch movies is going to get the data from the internet. Once the movie list is available, then the render is going to be called because there is a change in the state, and that actually makes it the latest state which consists of all the movies from the actual state object over here. So let's save this, go back to the browser and see what's going on there. And you'll see now that it has made a request on the internet. So you can also go and check the network tab here. And you can see in the network tab under XHR, there is one request that brings up Spider-Man movies. Let's go and change the search string from Spider-Man to, let's say, Thor. Save it and go back, and you should now see all the movies related to the keyword Thor are being displayed over here. So that's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's see what is routing all about. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's understand what is routing and single page applications all about. Here is an example of a single page application which is Gmail. You can see on the address bar, it says here hash inbox, because of which we are able to see all my inbox content inside this particular area. However, if I change that inbox to chats, either by clicking this here or manually typing that, you can see now it's showing me all the chats in my Gmail account. So the inbox is gone, chats come back. If I click on spam, or if I change this to spam manually and press enter, you can see that the area where the chats were displayed is now being populated with all the spam content. And likewise, the draft or trash, you can check everything. The word here is the route path. So whatever the path information, the path identifies what component to be displayed in this particular section. So in any single page application, you have an area of your application that dynamically changes based on the path that is available on the address bar. So in our application, for example, the slash or localhost 3000 should display me the home page, whereas if I type here slash movies, I should get this particular movie list. But probably if I say slash details, then I want to get details of a particular movie. To do this, you have to first install a new package called React Router DOM. So let's go and do that first. I go to the command prompt. In this new tab, I'm going to type here npm I. Make sure that you are in your current working directory, which is the project directory. And then type here npm I for install React Router DOM. When you press enter, again, it's going to take a minute or less and installs this dependency, adds to the package.json as well. You may ignore these errors because npm install is trying to install in different means, and finally it achieves installation of React Router DOM 5.1.2. Let's go verify the same thing in the package.json as well. You can see that there is a React Router DOM that's added now. And let's go to the app.js and then import a couple of things from here. So the first thing we're going to do is to import from React Router DOM. And what we want to do here is either something called as browser router or a hash router. Now a hash router allows us to add hash like this one. Now if you want, you can use that, but somehow if you use this, it will affect your search engine optimization. So let's not use that. So let's come back and use what's called browser router. And the browser router is like a component. We can use it like HTML tags. And then we also have one more component called route that defines a route. So in any single page application using React, you need to surround the entire application using this browser router component. So I'm going to open the tag here and then close this slash browser router after this one. So that's the first part in my application. And the second one is where I want to define a couple of routes over here saying that, hey, if the path is slash, then render a home component. If it is called movies, then I want it as a movie list component. To do that, let's get rid of this movie list and then add here a route. And then we say path equals to slash, indicating if you haven't visited anything other than the home page. And we also type here exact equals to true. And this is to indicate that there is nothing else other than the slash, because slash is going to be part of every path. We want to say that the component to be instantiated is the home component. So that's it, nothing else. And the same thing I can copy paste, Option Shift down arrow or Alt Shift down arrow to duplicate the same thing. And this time I want to say that if this is called movies, we don't need to add this exact equals to true, but component is going to be movie list component. So let's save this and go back to the browser. And you can see now that I am taken to the home page instead of the movie list. But I can always come down here and then type here slash movies and then press enter. And now you can see we got the movie list component. So again, if I remove these movies and then press enter, I should be taken to the home page. So this is what the routing all about. But one more thing that we also want to do is that, hey, when you are getting the movies, we may also want to specify something like search text equals to, say, for example, Spider-Man. When I press enter, I should be able to supply this Spider-Man via this particular search text, which is a query string parameter, to the movie list component, which is what is working behind the scene. But at this time, since we haven't done this, so the Spider-Man is not going to come up. It's still going to show me the Thor movies because this is not received by movie list. And this is what we want to do in the next lecture. So that's it for this lecture. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's see how we can handle this query string parameter in a single page application. So in other words, in the movie list component, we want to be able to read the value for search text, which I'm giving it as Spider-Man. Notice we generally don't want to type it on the address bar directly, but we want to supply it from this text box. That we'll do in the subsequent lectures, but for the time being, we should be able to read this query string parameter. To do so, first let's go to our movie list component. And notice that our movie list component is a stateful component or a class-based component. It has a couple of built-in properties. Number one is the state, which we have created over here. There is a second one which is called props, which is an object representing all the properties passed from the parent component. Now in this case, the movie list is instantiated in app. So here it is instantiated. In case if some properties were passed along with this, what are those props? We can access them here. So for the time being, I'm just going to go do a console log of this.props. And we'll also say that the this.props is what actually we are trying to print over here. Save this, go back over to the browser and then go to the console. And you can see that it says there is something called history, location, and then there is a match. And these are the properties that came up automatically because now we have included browser router for the entire application. One of the interesting aspects you can see here is that location is a property that represents an object that consists of the path name, that is /movies. That's our path here. There is also a search property which contains the entire query string. So in case if I had got something else here, even that also would have been included over here. And then there is something called hash or state, etc. Now it is our responsibility to extract the value for this particular search text and then process that. Now that's going to be a difficult task by ourselves if I want to do, because there could be multiple parameters. First of all, I have to remove this question mark. Then I have to split that using ampersand because multiple parameters would be separated using ampersand. And then I have to extract the value of search text, and that would contain some URL encoded characters like plus, which represents a space. So all these things we have to do, which would be a tough task. So instead, we can depend on a third-party API called query string. So first, let's go to our console, install this npm package called query string like this. And this is going to take a minute or less and installs the query string. And this has a function called parse, which can convert a query string into an object consisting of a bunch of name value pairs. So since this is now ready, let's go back to our code. Import query string from query-string. That's the one that we wanted. And this is where we don't want the word thar, but we want to get the actual value from the query string parameters. So I'm going to say here query string dot parse, and then we say here this dot props. We remember we had the props. Props actually has a property called location. We saw that over here, and location has a property called search. So we have to say here this dot props dot location dot search, and that's the actual name that is given. Now that represents this entire string like question mark, search text, etc., etc. The result of this parse is an object, and let's call this as Q. So Q is an object that represents all the query string parameter now. And we wanted the value of the parameter called search text. So we simply have to say here q dot search text now. So Q is the result of this parsing that may contain multiple name value pairs. In our case, we have only one, and we are extracting that one single value now. So as soon as I save this, if I go back to the browser, note that currently it says Spider-Man here, and then we got all the Spider-Man. So instead of Spider-Man, if I type here Iron Man, I should get all the Iron Man movies. Or if I say search text equals to Thor, I should get all the Thor movies from there. So that's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's link this text box to this movie list. So whatever you're going to type and search, that is the movie that you want to see over here. Welcome back. Now that we are able to get the list of movies based on the search text as a query string parameter over here, now let us see how to supply the same thing from the text box over here, which is inside the header component. So let's go back to the header component over here, which is header.jsx. And the first thing that we want to do is to surround this particular input text box with a form element. So I'm going to break it down in multiple lines so it becomes easy for us to understand. I'm going to add a form, and then we say here on submit equals to a function that we want to write inside this particular class. We'll come back for that in a minute. And the slash form will be after the input. Now let's write a function inside this header class over here, and then use the same thing inside this submit handler. And we can probably call this as submit handler itself. And I'm going to write a function which is a regular JavaScript function, and we will see what is the problem with that, and then refactor the same thing into an arrow function. So first I'm going to write a function called submit handler, which is a function, and that's supposed to take an event object because we are going to assign that to an event handler over here. And the first thing that I want to do is to, whenever you submit this particular form, it tries to navigate to a different URL on the address bar. So we want to cancel that effect. So we want to say evt.prevent default. So the default behavior of form submission is cancelled. And for the time being, I'm just going to type here console.log, and I'll say here this is, and I print the keyword this itself. And one last thing is that we have to assign this function to the onSubmit event handler here, and that can be done by typing here this.submit handler. Notice that I'm not calling the function, I'm just giving the name of the function here. So whenever you type something in the search box here and press enter, it is equivalent of form submission. And that time React.js is supposed to call this function by supplying the event object, and then we are calling the event.preventDefault, which cancels the form submission. And then I'm just getting the console.log over here. So let's save this, go back to the browser. Now I'm going to type here ironman, press enter, and now you can see it says here this is undefined. So we're able to come to the header.jsx line number 7, but it says here this is undefined. Now the reason for this is when this function is created here, it's a regular JavaScript function, and when it is invoked from the form's perspective. So it is just treated as a global function, and in the global context there is no keyword called this, and hence we are getting this error. So to solve this problem, we have to tell React.js that hey, this function whenever it's called is always supposed to be called in the context of the class header. Now for this you may have to write a constructor. There are two approaches. The first approach involves writing a constructor, and since our class extends another class, you always must call the superclass constructor. And then we're going to say here this.submit handler equals to this.submit handler dot bind of this. Now this looks like a complicated statement, but it's pretty simple. We're actually binding the keyword this, and note that inside the constructor this represents an object of header class, and we bind that object with the this.submit handler, and then we are assigning to this.submit handler again, which means when we are assigning this.submit handler here, it has been tightly bound with the this keyword, which means it is bound with the header component itself. So if I save this now and then go back to the browser, and it's reloaded now, and I'm going to type here once again ironman and press enter, and now you can see it comes back with this is an object of header class, and header class has got props, context, refs, and few other properties. So if I expand over here, you can see props is an empty object. So this is another problem that we have to address because we don't have the routing information here. So now let's see what is the second alternate to this. The second alternate is a very simple mechanism, so I don't need to write any of these things, but simply assign this to an arrow function and the job is done. So now you see that we have submit handler, which is a property of this class, but it's an arrow function. Now arrow functions automatically assign this keyword with the function itself, so we don't have to really do a binding. So the binding takes place automatically. So I save this, go back to the browser again, and then notice that it's been reloaded. So I'm going to type here, say Spider-Man, press enter, and you can see I get the exact same output without having to go through the constructor and binding of this keyword with a function. The second problem is now the props doesn't carry anything. So right now props is an empty object. We wanted the props to contain history, location, etc. Now in the previous case we saw that it was automatically added, but this time it was not. So what we do now is we would now import something called withRouter, which is a function from React Router DOM. So I'm going to say here import from React Router DOM, and what we want to import is a function called as withRouter, and all I have to do is to use this withRouter function to pass this header class. So if you carefully observe, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a function called withRouter here by supplying the class, and the return value itself is another component. So in other words, we are supplying a component here to withRouter which returns another component. In fact, it returns the same component with added benefits. Now this kind of functions are called higher order component. So a higher order component is simply a function that takes a component and returns an altered component. So let's save this, go back to the browser. Once again, you can see that it's been refreshed. I'm going to type, say, iron, press enter, and this time you can see that the props is not an empty object. It contains history, location, match, etc. And in our history now we have a bunch of functions like history.go, etc. We want to make use of this function called push, and when we call history.push with a new location, that automatically tells React that we want to change the location of your application. So because the location contains the path information, automatically the routes will be updated. Now, before we proceed further, we will have a look at one more member of this keyword here, or the object of header component. Now, apart from this.props, there is also another attribute or property called this.refs, which is currently empty. Now, the refs property of a component correspond to any HTML element which is referenced using a kind of an ID. Since React is referring to something called virtual DOM and not the real DOM, we can't use the get element by ID, because get element by ID is a function of DOM API which works on a real DOM, and you don't want actually React to talk to the real DOM all the times, because that's the whole idea of React.js, which it wants to avoid talking to the real DOM. So in order to refer to the elements which is inside the virtual DOM, we can give an ID to any of these elements, but not using the ID attribute, but something called ref attribute. So I'm going to say here ref equals to, let's say for example, I'll call it as search TF for search text field. Save this, go back to the browser and type something here, doesn't matter what it is, and press enter. Look at what is the refs right now. Now refs is an object that has one property called search TF, which is nothing but an input element. So the entire element is what we have got over here. Now had I given to a div, for example, I can say here ref equals to say d1, and now I have a d1 as another ref. So if I go back over here and type some ASD, press enter, you can see now refs correspond to two attributes. One is search TF and d1, which is a div. So any HTML element you want, you can access them using the refs. So let's go back, get rid of that ref equals to d1. We don't need that. What now we will do is we will get rid of this, and we're going to extract two things from the props. Let history as well as refs equals to this.props. Basically, we are extracting these two attributes from this particular props into a local variable. So I can say here now history.push, and we need to give a new location which is movies search txt equals to, and then we have to say plus refs dot search tf, because this is the ref that we have here, search tf, But that's an entire text box. We just want the value from that, and we just give a value like this. So now we are actually passing something to history.push. And remember, history came because of the routing, and now the browser router we are using will reevaluate all the routes, and one of the routes in our app.js, if you see, matches that path. And now that component will be the movie list component and not the home component. So that's what it's supposed to happen. So let's go check this out. Let's save it. But let's just go to the home page so that we see the change in the home component over here. Now let me type Spider-Man and see what happens. And I see an error here. It says search TF of undefined. And that's probably because search TF is from refs. Now that is correct. But refs is not coming from this.props. Refs is coming directly from this. So I don't need to give this here. And I can directly type here this.refs.searchtf.value. So our URL effectively is going to be /movies $search. This is supposed to be text. So /movies $search text equals to this.refs.searchtf.value, which would be Spider-Man. So I'm going to save this, go back to the browser. So we are on the home page. I'm going to type here Spider-Man again and press enter. And now we see we got the movies that have Spider-Man in the title. While this looks like it's working, we may have one small issue with this. To see the same, let's go and change this Spider-Man to, let's say, for example, Iron Man, and press enter. And now we see it's changing on the address bar, but I don't see that effect over here. The real reason for this is nothing to do with the header.jsx here. Header.jsx is perfectly all right. We are changing this, but the change in the path is not changing the actual component. So this is the problem with the browser router, because by default it looks at this component and say, hey, there is no change in the path, not the values, because this is an additional information related to the path. But it only looks at the path and say, hey, /movies is changed to /movies, which means I don't have to really replace the component. But what we want to say is that we want to say that there is a change in the properties that we are supplying over here. So because there is a change in the properties of these movies, even though the component itself is the same, we want to re-render the component. So this is what we want to tell React.js. To do that, let's go back to our MovieList component, where we are trying to fetch the movies, but the fetch movies happened only during the component did mount, and the component mounted is not changed when /movies is changed from /movies to /movies itself. So in order to tell React.js to re-render the component during the change in the props, let's add one more lifecycle function over here, which is called component did update. And this is going to get the previous properties, and we have access to the current props also. We want to check if the previous props is any different than the current props, then call the fetch movies once again. So we're going to just type here if this.props.location is not equals to pre-props, the previously received props, and it has location attribute. If it is not the same, automatically we want to change. So now the location includes not only /movies, but it also includes the $search text equals to and its value. So since the previously it was Spider-Man and currently it is Iron Man, so there is a change. So all I have to do is to call this.fetchMovies once again. And that's all we have to do, nothing else. Let's save this, go back to the browser. We are getting the Iron Man over here, and let's just type here Thor and press enter. And you see we are getting, so let's just type here Avengers and press enter, and we see all Avenger movies. And incidentally, I see a warning over here. It says encountered two children with the same key, TT whatever this number, and I believe that's probably because it's giving me the same movies, Avengers Endgame, twice, and this is not my issue. The issue is from the OMDB API. So it has given the same movie twice, don't know why. But since that is the issue and we want to really address that, what I can do is I can go back to my MovieList.jsx32, which is in here. Notice that we are supplying key is equal to m.imdbid. That is the reason why we are getting that problem. What I can do is I can replace this with a index. Let's say, for example, this is going to be index, but index is the array index that I get because of the map function. So I may have to ask for not only m, but also the index. Now that problem should not be there because we're not using the IMDb ID because it's getting duplicated for some reason. So if I go back to the browser, you see that we have the same duplicate movies, but I don't have the warning that I got earlier. Now just to check once again if things are working properly, let's go and type here mask, press enter, and we got the list of movies with mask in their title. That's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's see how clicking this particular movie browser title takes me back to the home component. Welcome back. Now we want to provide a link to this particular title. That's the general practice. When you click on that, the idea is you go back to the home page, which is nothing but our localhost 3000 / or just 3000. Right now that's not working. So if I click on this, you can see it is not working. I have to provide some hyperlink over there. Now to provide the hyperlink, we have actually a component called a link. And let's go back to the header component over here. This is where we have the H3 movies. And we want to provide a hyperlink over here. And it's very simple. Ask for a component called link, which is coming from React Router DOM. And all I have to do is to surround this movie browser text using a tag called a link and then give the text. But then we have to say link to where. So we just have to say to equals to / and that's all we have to do. This also by default brings an underline because it's going to be converted into a ahref, and by default the ahref will always have an underline. You can see that there is an underline over here, but clicking this anyway takes me over there without any problem. No page reload, but the component gets changed. And if I don't want that underline, I just have to add a style, and I'm going to just add here a style. And remember, style is an expression which takes an object. So the first pair of curly brackets here represents that it's an expression like what we have done over here. But the second pair of curly bracket now represents an object, and the object is supposed to have the CSS properties. I have to say here text decoration, and then I'll say here a value of none, indicating I don't need any extra decoration. So don't get confused that there is a double curly bracket. Like if you're coming from Angular or Vue.js, you'll see that the double curly bracket represents a kind of an expression. Here it is only saying that, hey, this is an object, and that object has a property value of text decoration and none, and that object is fed as an expression to style attribute. So I save this and go back to the browser. You can see that the underline is gone. It still is a hyperlink, and that's why we see that fingertip over here. So I'm going to just type here Spider-Man and press enter. We got it. I click on this. I go back to the home page. And that's the end of this lecture. In the next lecture, let's see one more component where when we click on a particular movie, I want to get the complete details about this particular movie. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's create another component called MovieDetails component, which is supposed to give me the details of any movie that I choose to click on. Obviously, this involves a couple of things. Number one, when I click on this, I have to change the path. We know how that works. So we just have to provide a link and then say to equals to whatever the path corresponding to that. And the second thing is we have to fetch the details of the movie using the IMDb ID. So our fetching remains the same thing except the parameters would be changing. For example, you can see that we are having here S equals to Iron Man gives me an array of all the movies that correspond to the title. Whereas if I give I equals to and then this supply this particular IMDb ID, then we will get a different output. So I'm going to type here I equals to and the IMDb ID, I press enter. You'll see that we are supposed to get a single object this time consisting of varieties of details of this particular movie. That includes, for example, title, year, what is the rated, released, what is the total duration, right? So lots and lots of details that we can explore. So to create the same thing, let's first go to our VS Code and create a new component under the components folder. So I'm going to create a new file over here. I will call this as MovieDetails.jsx. I will write imrc and then get the corresponding import statements. And then we're going to create a stateful component over here by typing ccs and then press enter. And we got the MovieDetails, which extends component, that's a class. And the state here is going to represent a single movie object. So I'll type here movie and its value is going to be a curly bracket. This represents an empty object. And we want to render some JSX. So for the time being, I'm just going to type here an empty div, nothing else. When the component is loaded, I want to get the details of the movie, which is supplied via the query string parameter, which is nothing but the IMDb ID that we are going to use. So if I go back to the MovieList component, this part remains the same up to here, except that we want to send I equals to and the IMDb ID over here. That's one change. And the second change is whatever the data that I get is a single movie. So I want to assign that to the state. So we want to make some changes over there as well. So I'm going to copy these functions, come back to MovieDetails, paste over here. And the first change is nothing but this is I equals to the IMDb ID. And assuming that the query string parameter is also called as IMDb ID. So I'm going to type here IMDb ID. And this is supposed to be supplied from our click event handler. So that is whenever I click on a particular movie, this IMDb ID I will be supplying. So I have to write the link over here. So we'll do that in a minute. The second thing is that whenever I got the data, let's call it as movie instead of movies because I got a single movie object. And the same thing is going to be applied to the state also. So the current state where movie is an empty object will now be replaced with the data that is coming from the internet. So now that we have the movie object over here, we can try printing the same thing on the div over here if you want, just to test it out. For example, I can just use a curly bracket and then I can type here json.stringify of this.state.movie, and that's going to just show me what is the string version of that entire JSON object. Let's give it a try. The second thing that we have to do is to go to the app.js and then we have to say here that, hey, whenever there is a path called something like details or movie details, we want to send a different component or we want to render a different component. So I'm going to just duplicate this by typing Shift Option down arrow or Shift Alt down arrow for Windows, and that's a copy there. And let's give a new path here called details. Since we are working with a movie, so I don't have to say that it's a movie details. So details, and the component is nothing but the movie details component. So save this. Now we have a path. And one last thing that we have to do is to go to the MovieList.jsx, where a movie list is nothing but an array, and that array represents one movie card. So we now have to go to the MovieCard.jsx, write a click event handler for this div such that when you click on the div, a function is invoked. And the way you can do is you can say that onClick equals to an expression, and generally onClick equals to, we assign a function name and the function will be automatically called by React.js. But this time we want to invoke a function because we want to supply a IMDb ID of this movie. So first let's write a function over here. And since we are writing a function based component, we can declare a variable here, say for example, get movie details equals to an arrow function that takes an IMDb ID and probably does some work over here. So we'll come back to that in a minute. Now note that this is a variable or a local variable of this particular function, which is nothing but another function. So we can assign that over here. But if I assign, then on click, React.js will invoke it by passing an event object, and we wanted an IMDb ID. So that is why what we do is we write an arrow function here and then say get movie details of movie.imdb ID. So in other words, we are not allowing React.js to invoke our function. We are asking in React.js to invoke this function. And when React.js invokes this function, we get the event object here, which is not important for me right now. That's why I'm not receiving that event. But then I'm invoking the function getMovieDetails, and I'm passing the IMDb ID of the current movie, which is what is received over here. And in the previous example, we actually called history.push over here by saying a new path. Similarly, we have to do the same thing over here. But if you look at the header.jsx, we said history is part of this.props, and this is valid only inside a class-based component, whereas our MovieCard is a function-based component, so we can't really do that over there. But what we can do is we can actually ask for this with router higher order component from React router DOM, and then say that I want to convert this MovieCard component into a component that has all the router information. So we're going to say here with router. So now this component is having access to the history object also. But all these come as additional properties. So we can simply type here along with the movie, which is coming from the parent component, with router would have added something called history, and now we got the history over here. And I simply have to type history.push, and where do I have to go? I have to go to /details IMDB ID equals to plus the argument that I received over here. I see a small error over here. I believe that's because I missed an arrow over here, and everything is fine. Let's save this. Let's go back and check if our application is working as expected. Now I'm getting a couple of errors called query string is undefined, Axios is undefined in the MovieDetails.jsx, and that's primarily because I copied and pasted these functions from another component. So where we had got these two, so let's copy this and then paste over here. So now that problem is solved. So one final thing that we have to do is to display the details of the movie in the renders return function. So that's what we're going to do now. So first thing I'm going to do is to extract the movie from state. So I'll say here let movie equals to this dot state. So I don't have to say this dot state dot movie dot every time I want to access some details. And now that I've got it, let's organize our return statement properly. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to have two sections over here. The first part on the left side is the image of the movie, which is the movie.poster. And the second part is going to be a table that displays all the details of the movie. So let's go write it. I'm going to type here dot row greater than dot call dash md dash 4, and that's for the poster, plus dot call dash md dash 8, and that's going to be another child column. So I'm going to press enter. So we got two columns over here, and the first column is going to just contain a img dash thumbnail, and then the source for that happens to be an expression which is nothing but movie dot poster, and then we have alt equals to movie dot title. And inside the second column, which is on the right side, I'm going to have here a h1 which consists of movie.title. So let's see if this is going to work properly, and if that comes up properly, let's display the rest of the details also. So let's go back to the browser. Let's click on one of the movie over here, and I should get the details of the movie over here. But I got an error saying that cannot read property poster of undefined. Now, one of the reason is we copied and pasted this straight from the movie list, and note that whenever we got the response, we got the rest.data, that is fine, but the data doesn't have search object, it has the movie directly. So I'm going to remove this line, and I think the problem is solved. So let's save this, go back to the browser, and you can see we got the Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2. So I'm going to go back. Let's click on one of the other movies. So you can see that we got the movie poster and the name of the movie over here. So let's go back to our code, display the remaining details for this movie. So for displaying the remaining details of the movie, I'm just going to type here a table.table, and this is going to give you a table with a class name of table. That's the Bootstrap class name. which is going to have a T body, and that's going to have one row with two columns in it. So I can say here TD into 2. But if I want, say, around 10 columns, so I'm going to just multiply this by 10, and the TD is going to be multiplied by 2 because I want for every row 2 columns. So if I press enter, you're going to get a big table with a T body and 10 rows where every row has 2 columns in it. So the first one I want to display is the director, and the value for that happens to be movie.director. The next one probably is the plot of the movie. So I can say here movie.plot. Then we have the year, movie.year. And similarly, I have to give the rest of the details, which I will pause and come back in a minute. All right, I have given few other details also. Now let's go back to our application over here. And now you can see I got more details on the movie also. So I'm going to look for something else now. Let's say Thor. I got lots of movies on Thor now. So I'm going to click on the first one. When I click on the first one, you should get the details of the first one again. Let's see that in the full screen mode. So I'm going to go back to movie browser and let's look at, say, Iron Man and press enter. We got some of those. And I'm going to select something that not a regular Iron Man over here. When I click on this, we got the details of the same. We can also give a button over here or somewhere at the bottom where when I click on that, I want to go back to the previous one. Right now, I'm clicking the back button over here, but I can actually provide a button by myself. So the way we can do is, let's go back to our code. After the table, probably I can add a button with a class name of btn primary, and then we'll type here back. So this is supposed to take me back to the previous page, and for which I can type here onClick equals to a function, and I can write a function directly by typing an arrow function, and I'll have to say here this dot props dot history dot go of -1. Now note that the entire function call, I'm doing it right here. I don't have to write another function and then pass the name over here. So for one-liners, you can always do something like this. So let's go save this and see if this works. So I'm going to go back over here. There's a back button. When I click on this back button, you can see I'm taken back to the previous page. I click on one of the other movie. I still have this details. I click on the back button. It takes me back to the previous page once again. A small thing to notice here is that whenever I click on a particular movie, it will go blank here for some time and then actually the data comes. And this is primarily because OMDB API is the one that is taking a bit of time. And what we would like to do is whenever we click on this, the movie details component is being loaded. At that point in time, we want to check if this particular object here, the movie object, is it an empty object like its initial state, or has it been populated with some data from omdbapi.com, and then conditionally render this particular JSX. So to do that, let's put an if condition over here, and we will also declare one variable called output equals to probably a div/div where I can say something like loading. But if movie is an object with one or more properties, that means it has been loaded. Notice that initial state has an empty object. There is no properties in that. So that becomes our criteria to check if it's loaded or not. So we write an if condition here such that if movie is defined as well as the number of keys in the movie object is greater than 0. So initially it is 0, so obviously this will not satisfy. So obviously it's going to remain as div loading. But if this condition is satisfied, then all I have to do is to take this entire div from here till this part. So I'm going to cut this from here and then assign this to the variable output like this. And once we have assigned that, now I can return output as part of the render function over here. So this is how we can render a JSX conditionally. And let's see if this is going to work. So I'm going to save this and then go back to the browser. It has been reloaded. Let's click on a movie that we haven't loaded yet, because if it was loaded once, it would have been cached. Let's click on this last one. So when I click on this, you will see that it says loading, and then the actual content comes up here. So instead of having a text loading, we can also have an animated GIF. You can search and get animated GIF files from lots of free websites. So I do have one. I am going to copy that onto my public images folder. Right now it has only vinod.jpg. I want to copy and paste one of the file that I have called loading.gif. So I do have this loading.gif, which simply just gives a progress of your application. Of course, it's a GIF file. It's going to get into a loop to display the same thing. So let's go back to our output here. So the output has div loading. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put here div class name equals to, let's say, text center. So indicating that everything has to be in the middle, as well as instead of loading, I'm going to add a tag here, img src equals to /images/loading.gif or gif, and the alternate text would be, say, loading, and save this. And now if I go back to the browser, you can see that the image came up. Let's click on a back button here to see a different movie. Let's search for a different movie altogether. Let's say Avengers, and press enter. And I got Avengers movie. I'm going to click on one of the Avenger movie over here. So when I click on that, you can see initially it shows a loading icon or image, and then there is a content over here. So this is how you can render a JSX conditionally. So that's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's see how to create a production build of our application. Welcome back. Now that our application is ready and we want to deploy this onto internet so everybody can access in the world. So first thing we have to do is to convert our React.js application with all these source code that we have got in the JSX format into a simple HTML, CSS, JavaScript files. For this, first let's have a look into the package.json, which contains a couple of scripts over here. And we have been using this one so far by typing npm start, and that's what we have actually done over here. So the npm start has actually run a development web server, and it also has given here a hint saying that to create a production build, use the npm run build. So start is like a keyword, so npm start has done its job. Similarly, test also, I can simply type npm test. But apart from start and test, any other additional entries over here, if you want to invoke them, you have to type npm run and then that entry name. So in this case, npm run build, npm run eject. If you type your own here, then you have to type npm run and whatever the key you have given. Now this is what we want to do. So we want to say npm build, and that in turn is going to run a command called react scripts space build. Now React scripts is a command that is available under node modules. If you see that there is a .bin folder, and inside that you should see all the executables over here. So on Windows you may see .cmd files. For example, you can see that there is one file here called React scripts. On Windows you may see React scripts.cmd, and that's what actually it is running. What we want to do now is to go back to the command prompt and then press Ctrl C here to stop the server being executed. So obviously now if I go back to the browser and refresh, you'll see that it's not going to come back because we stopped the server, no longer running. So I go back to the command prompt and then look into the directories that we have. So if I say here ls-l, you'll see that I don't have a folder called build, but I'm going to type here npm run build. This is going to create a new folder called build, which is the production build container. What it has done is it has created a bunch of JavaScript files over here. Let's go and have a look at what is there in the build. So if I go back to the VS Code and let's collapse all these, let's close all the open files. You see that there is a new folder called build. Let's refresh once, and inside the build you will see the content coming from the public folder. We had all these folders over here like images, and bunch of files. All of them have been copied over here. And in addition, if you look at the index.html right now, it is kind of unformatted because it's all one-liner. Unnecessary new line characters have been eliminated. And if you carefully observe the end of this particular HTML file, you will see that it refers to main.somehash.chunk.js, and there is another chunk.js. This is called code split. So our application is split into multiple pieces, and then there is some code injection that's going on over here. Now our application is ready for deployment, which is what we're going to do in the next lecture. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's have a look into what is Google Firebase all about. So I'm going to open a brand new Google Chrome tab and look for Google Firebase. And the first link that I get, I'm going to click on that, and it's going to take me to a marketing page. So in here, you can work with different kinds of Firebase products. Firebase is a service provided by Google, which allows us to keep our data in the form of some object databases. We can do some hosting of our applications. We can store files. We can actually do authentication mechanism using Google, Facebook, or any other kinds of social media logins, including the OTP authentication. And there are many features that are provided by Firebase. So the first thing that you can see here is that it says go to console. And I've purposely logged out of my Gmail account. So if I click on this, it's going to ask me to log in first. And I'm going to select my default username and provide the password for the same. And that takes me to what's called Firebase console. As you can see, I have created many projects in my Firebase account. When I click on add project, it'll ask you what's the name of the project you want. And since we are working on a movie browser application, I'm going to type here movie browser. What it also does is it gives a unique ID for my application, which has this some kind of hash number. This is going to be my website name or a prefix to my website. So it's going to be like moviebrowser-5fc80.firebaseapp.com. If I want, I can customize this by removing this. But then, of course, if I try to save, it says that, hey, it's already taken by someone else. Probably I can type here React-movie browser. It says even that is also taken by someone. So I'm going to just type here React.js-movie browser, which is available for now. If you want, you can also assign a custom domain name, which you may have to pay for, to this particular project. Let's click on save, continue. It also asks, do you want to enable Google Analytics for your Firebase project? For this project, I don't want, but in practice, if you want to target analysis of various kinds, so you may enable that, but for now I don't want. I just click on this checkbox, click on create project, and in a minute or less the project is created. So the project is ready. Let's click on the continue. Now you can see it has taken me to my project dashboard. Over here my project is listed along with the other projects that I have here, which I can switch between. So but for now I want the movie browser itself. As you can see that there are different services provided by Google Firebase. Authentication is where you can enable social media or login based on email and password, or even the OTP authentication also. It provides a database, which is basically a bunch of objects that you can store and then retrieve using some query language. There is also file storage you have, like if you have some requirement for storing huge files, you can use this service. But this is what we want to use, which is the hosting. So we want our web application to be hosted on Google's cloud platform over here. So this is what we want to do. And there is also something called functions, which allows us to create our own RESTful web services. So if I click on this hosting, it's going to give me more details of how can I get started with this. Since this is a brand new hosting, it doesn't show anything over here except there is a getting started link. When I click on that, it says here, you have to first install what's called Firebase CLI, which is a command line interface. And it's nothing but a bunch of Firebase tools. This is the first step that we have to do. Once that is done, we have to initialize the project and deploy our project. So 3 steps, which is what we're going to do in the subsequent lectures. So that's it for this lecture. See you in the next one. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's see how to install the Google Firebase tools, or it's also called as Firebase CLI. So I'm back in my command prompt. It doesn't matter which directory I'm right now in. Although I'm in my project directory, it doesn't matter. Because the command that we're going to give is a global installation. I have to do here npm I or install -g for global. This is why the current folder doesn't matter. And then I simply have to type here Firebase tools. On Windows, you just have to press enter. On Mac OS and Linux, I have to prefix this command with sudo so I can run it as an administrator. It is going to ask me the password. I'm going to enter my password, press enter, and this is going to install Firebase tools globally so I can execute the command called Firebase from any folder I want. So as you can see, Firebase tools 7.15.1 has been successfully installed, and now I have access to a command called Firebase. So I can say here Firebase --version, and I should see the same version once again. You can also say Firebase --help, and it's going to give you some help on the command Firebase itself. As you can see that there is a bunch of them. One of them, straight away you should observe that there is an option called login and logout. And now using this Firebase tool, what we have to do basically is to connect to our Firebase account which are currently logged in as. Now note that I have logged in to this user currently. To do that, I may have to go and type here Firebase login. When I press enter, it's going to ask me a couple of questions. Number one, it says that, hey, do you want Firebase to collect some anonymous data so it can improvise on the Firebase tool itself? If I'm okay with that, I can say yes and then press enter. And what it does is it's going to take me to the browser and ask me to validate or verify is this a legitimate operation. So I say yes, I want to use this one. So my account kayarthaya.vinod@gmail.com is the one that I want to use it in the command prompt. If you have multiple, then you can choose a different account. At one point in time, the Firebase CLI can connect to only one account. So I'm going to select this one, validate the same. Firebase is confirming all these information will be provided to the CLI. Is that okay? So I'll say yes, allow. And now it says Firebase CLI login is successful. You can go back to command line and then check out. I see a message here as well. It says success, logged in as kayarthaya.vinod@gmail.com. Now if you try to log in again, it's going to come back and tell the same thing that, hey, you're already logged in as so-and-so user. And one more thing that we can check is that Firebase list. This is going to give you the list of projects that we are currently having. It says that the command is deprecated. Instead, use this Firebase projects list. So I'm going to copy and paste the same thing, press enter. And it's going to list out all the projects that we have. And the one that we created, movie browser, which is the latest one, which is React.js movie browser. This is the project that we have. And in the next lecture, let's see how we can initialize the Firebase project for our application so we can do a deployment. So that's it for this lecture. See you in the next one. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's initialize the Firebase project on our working folder. So it's very important that you are in the current project directory. So I'm going to clear and then see where am I right now. And notice that I am on my project directory where there is a package.json, and that's important. You must be in your project folder to do the subsequent commands. And the command that I want to do is to Firebase init. This is a one-time command, and this is going to ask you a few questions. Create a couple of files. One of them is called Firebase RC, which is a hidden file like .firebase RC, and there will be a second file called firebase.json, which consists of all the information that we're going to key in over here. So we can always edit them. So let's press enter. And the first thing it's going to ask you is what kind of projects that you want to work with. And this is like check boxes. So be careful over here. Don't press enter until you have selected something. So if you want to work with multiple Firebase services such as authentication or databases, etc. So you can choose different ones. But in my case, I want to use only the hosting. I have to use the arrow keys to select something and then press spacebar to highlight the same. You can see it says, hey, you have chosen hosting. If you want, you can again press the spacebar to untick the same, and I'm going to select the same thing. And then now I'm going to press enter. This is the only thing that I want to use right now. So it's going to ask, do you want to create a new Firebase project or do you want to use an existing one? And in the previous lecture, we created a Firebase project and that's what we want to use. So let's say use an existing project, press enter. And this is going to list out all of them that are currently available. And the one that I want to use is basically the movie browser React.js project. So I'm going to scroll down using the arrow key. And you can see that there is a React.js movie browser project. So I press enter, then it'll ask you which folder contains your deployment content. If you remember, when we created a production build, we had something called build as a folder. And you can see it on my screen right here. There is a folder called build that contains all the files that we want to deploy. So that's all I have to do. By default, it was expecting a public folder because that's the general convention. But React.js build tool has created a folder called build. I just have to type the name of that. Now, since my folder already contains something, there may be a warning message later. So in this case, it's asking configure as a single page application. Now, this is really very important because every request that we send back to the remote server will be redirected back to the index.html where React.js will take control and update our paths. Whenever you're working with a single page application, this is really, really important. Let's say yes over here. And then next thing it asks is that, hey, build/index.html already exists. Do you want to overwrite? Here you should say no, because if you say yes, the index.html, which was created by React.js earlier, will now be replaced and some kind of a dummy static content will be kept over here. We don't want that to happen. You say no here, but if you said yes accidentally, you may have to create a build again. So I'll say no. I believe that's all. There is nothing else to this. You can see it has successfully initialized the project and now we are ready to deploy our project. So that's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's do the actual deployment of our application onto Google Firebase, and then our web application is available on the internet and anybody in the world can access the same thing. Welcome back. In the previous lecture, we initialized the Firebase project. And if you look at carefully the folder content, so I'm going to type here ls-la, and that's going to show me all the files in the list format. You can see that it has created a file called .firebase.rc as well as firebase.json. Let's go to VS Code and have a look at the same thing. You can see that there is a .firebase.rc. It simply says the projects that we are working on is the React.js movie browser. So this is the project in our Firebase account that we created earlier. And in case if you want to work with multiple projects, you can choose different ones as well. The important file here is the firebase.json. This contains information about your files which are going to be published. And you can see that it says here build is the public folder that it's going to look for. So the content of this build folder will be copied to our remote server on Google Firebase account. And it's going to ignore a couple of files over here. So let's go back to the command prompt and see how the deployment takes place. I'm going to clear the screen and then I'm going to type here firebase deploy. And this is going to now look into that firebase.json and copies all the files that are required into the remote server. And at the end, it's going to give you a feedback whether it was successful or failed. And if it's successful, what's the URL where you can access your application from. So let's press enter and it has begun the deploying. It says 18 files have been found and that's what it's trying to upload and finalizing the version. And it gives me a project console also. So this is where I can go and access my project, but for that I have to log in as the respective user. Whereas this is the URL that people in the world can access where your application is available. So I'm going to copy this and then go to a browser, open a new incognito window. So I know that I have not logged in anyways. So I'm going to paste the URL, press enter. and you'll see that your application now is readily available on the internet. So let's do a search for a movie, which might be a problem, and there is a solution to that also. Quickly we'll fix that. So I'm going to type in a movie title called Thor and press enter. You can see that it changed the address over here, but I didn't see any content over here. Now if I press F12 or if I go to view developer JavaScript console, you'll see that there is an error, and the error is very specifically, it says mixed content, and the page at https:// and my application path was loaded over HTTPS. So that's what it says. We are loading your page using a secure socket layer, but there is a request for an insecure XML HTTP request. That means you're sending an AJAX request to an endpoint which contains HTTP:/. Now that's because the OMDB API that we are using is not secure. This is not in my control because this is not my website, right? So the omdbapi.com is insecure, but I still want to access the same thing. To fix this problem now, we have to go back to our index.html, the index.html from the public folder, which is right over here. So we basically have to add a meta tag over here that basically upgrades the insecure content to a secure one. What we do is we add here meta, and we say HTTP equiv equals to content security dash policy. That's the HTTP equiv that we have to give. And then we say here content equals to upgrade insecure dash requests. This is all what we have to do for the meta tag. So this is going to instruct browsers like Chrome to say that, hey, if you got an HTTP request using an AJAX, just treat it as an HTTPS request. This is a workaround because I don't have control on OMDB API.com, which is an insecure request. So we still want to make a request. Because I made some changes over here, I have to do a build and a deploy again. On my command prompt, I'm going to type here npm run build. If that is successful, I have to do firebase deploy. Now on Windows, if this command doesn't work, run this command first. Once that command is over, execute this second command. On Linux platforms and Mac OS, you can simply type this command because it's equivalent to say, hey, if this command is successful, then execute the second command. So let's press enter and see if that's going to work. So the build is begun. And once the production build is ready, now it's actually doing a Firebase deploy, which means it's actually releasing a newer version of my project with the updated index.html file, and it's done. If I go back to the browser, let's reload this once over here, and now you can see I got the movies without a problem. There is no error. Of course, I should have removed this console log somewhere. I'm displaying the prompts. Let's click on one of the movie to see if there is a details that I'm getting. So I do get the details of the movie, and I can click the back button to go back. Click the movie browser title to go to the home page, and I should be able to search for anything else as well without any problem. This is how you do a deployment of your application. Now this deployment process is common to any websites or web application you create. Nothing specific about the React.js except that there is a npm run build you do before you do the deployment. That's it for this lecture. In the subsequent lectures, let's discuss what is progressive web application all about, and then we can see how we can convert our application into a progressive web application. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's have a look into a tool provided by Google Chrome called Lighthouse. This is an auditing tool. So here is my application running on Google Firebase. There's a react.js-movie-browser.firebase-app.com. So this is on a public domain now, and it is working fine. So if I go to search for some movie, let's say Thor, press enter, and then click on one of the movie, I should be able to see the loading GIF, and then I have this details of the movie. So the application is working just fine. So what we want to do is we want to go to view and then say developer. We can go to developer tools here or any of the other stuff like JavaScript console, etc. So I'm going to go to the developer tools. And one of the tool here you can see is the audits tool over here. There is a generate report option. It says identify and fix common problems that affect your site's performance, accessibility, and user experience. So this is a fantastic tool that we can use for evaluating our application. So what can we evaluate our application for? So here is a bunch of categories. You can see performance, progressive web app. That's what we are more interested in. Best practices, have you followed or not? Accessibility and SEO, or search engine optimization. We can test our application's performance against either a mobile device or desktop device. And 90% of the time, if it works better on mobile device, it would definitely work better on desktops as well. So let's keep all these checked and click on the generate report here and see what happens. This is going to now take a couple of minutes, and here is the rating of the application that we just now built. Performance 95 is the rating, and it says here 90 to 100 is the best performing applications. Accessibility, it says here 80, and the rating is less primarily because we have used a form without a label, and that's the reason why we got it. So we can fix that, not a problem. Look at that, best practices 100 out of 100, and SEO, search engine optimization, 100 out of 100. However, my application currently is not a progressive application at all, or progressive web application at all. So performance 95 is good. Let's scroll to the accessibility part, and you can see that the accessibility it's giving here, form elements do not have associated labels. That's what it says. In our UI, we don't want the label here. Labels would be given prior to or before the text boxes here, and we didn't want that because that doesn't look nice in our application. But just to make sure that this label is found, you can always go to your header component where there is a form and the input. You can surround the input with a label without actually giving any text for that. In any case, let's skip the accessibility part and scroll down to the PWA, or you can directly click on the PWA icon over there. But let's see what is this PWA all about. Some of the things that was not taken care of is current page does not respond with 200 when offline. We'll discuss about that in a minute. Start URL does not respond with 200 when offline, so more or less related. You can also see it says that it uses HTTPS but does not register something called ServiceWorker that controls the page and start URL. So we have to discuss about this as well. So if we take care of this, our application becomes a progressive web app as well. So at this point in time, notice that our application is not a PWA at all. So this is a bit about the Lighthouse, which is a auditing tool provided by Google. It's really very nice, and it allows us to evaluate our application. So we will fix both of these. We'll fix the accessibility part as well as the progressive web application part also in the subsequent lectures. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's understand what is a progressive web app all about. Progressive web apps, simply called PWAs, are the next big thing in the web development. They bring mobile app-like experience to the users of your web applications. Your web application on a mobile device can have many features, including access to camera, offline working, push notifications, and many others. However, there are 8 baseline characteristics of a progressive web applications defined by Google, and that's what we are actually going to look into in this lecture. Number 1, site is served over HTTPS. Since our application is deployed on Google's Firebase, Firebase provides a SSL certificate free of cost. And if you check it out here, there is a certificate which is valid, and the certificate is issued by GTSCA, or Certificate Authority, expires on Tuesday, 27th of October 2020. Of course, it's automatically going to be renewed as well. And here are some more details about that. So our application already satisfies the first requirement of PWA. Number 2, pages are responsive on tablets and mobile devices. Since we have used the Bootstrap CSS framework from Twitter, our application is mobile friendly as well. For example, if I press F12 on Google Chrome or Option Command I, that's going to take me to the developer tools. You can see here that there is a small toggle device toolbar. I can click on that and my application is now shown as if it is a responsive one. I can also choose a different device. For example, I can say iPhone 6, 7 or 8. I select that. You can also add a frame over here for that show device frame, and you can see my application is going to look like this on a mobile device, specifically iPhone 6 or 7 or 8. Now if I'm going to search for a movie over here, let's say Iron Man, and press enter, and you can see that the movies are stacked one below the other automatically without me having to do anything at all. And similarly, when I click on a particular movie, you will see that there is a loading and then the poster comes up, the details are stacked up one below the other. Now if I'm going to tilt the phone, this is how it's going to look like, right? If I'm going to, let's say, the home page or probably the back button over here, you can see that it's showing me one below the other. But if I'm going to change this from iPhone to say iPad, and you can see that the look and feel is different on iPad. So our application is already responsive in design because of Bootstrap. Number 3, all app URLs load while offline. Now this is the one that is a failing factor in our application. At this time, our application does not load offline. So if I go back to, say, for example, home page, and then my Wi-Fi I'm going to turn off, and then you can see if I reload the page, it's going to come back and say no internet. However, a PWA will still have something to show you and not the no internet error message. So we can achieve this by using something called offline storage. Now HTML5 introduced a concept called caching mechanism. So if I go to the application tab over here, you can see that there is a cache storage, application cache. These two can be used to store the HTML, CSS, JavaScript that is required to run our application, and then whenever you're offline, your browser is smart enough to pick that from the cache and shows that. So all the JavaScript will function as if the internet is there. However, if your application tries to go back to internet to collect some data, like you're searching for a movie, that feature may not work because only thing that is cached here is the HTML, that is the indexed HTML, CSS and the JavaScript. So to some extent, we can still make our application function. So all the JavaScript functionalities can work as long as they are not dependent on the network data. So we're going to use the cache storage and application cache, and the cache management is done by something called ServiceWorker. And if you go back to your application over here in the index.js, you see that we have a mechanism that says ServiceWorker.unregister, and here is a comment that is given by React.js. When we use the create React app, this came up automatically. If you want your app to work offline and load faster, you can change unregister to register below. So that's all we have to do. So you just have to change this to register from unregister. So all we have to do is to register the service worker and redeploy the same thing. And you can see that there is a serviceworker.js, and that's a standard JavaScript file which can be used on any web application. It has got few events, and the code inside this file is the one that is responsible for our cache management. So as the comment says here, there are some pitfalls. You can do better by writing your own service workers as well. Number 4, metadata provided for add to home screen. Once your service worker is enabled, you will automatically get option to add your web application to your mobile device home screen, and that can be controlled by something called manifest.json. So if you look at your application's public folder, there is a file here called manifest.json. Manifest.json contains some information that helps us customize the mobile experience for the user. Number 5, first load fast even on a slow network like 3G. If you remember, our home page has a minimalistic content which helps us load our application faster. In fact, the only slowness would be introduced because of the image that I have, so which we can avoid that and have a smaller image than the one that I already have to improvise the speed on that. So what we generally do is we give a basic skeleton of our application in the beginning, and then as and when the user starts clicking on options, we try to load more and more content. Now this can also be done by using a concept called code split. We haven't followed that. This is also called as lazy loading of components. There are many mechanisms to do that. In fact, in the ECMAScript standards itself, it is proposed that we can have a lazy loading of modules. Number 6, the site works cross-browser. Now this was one of the nightmares for any JavaScript developers in the past. However, we have been using something called JSX, which is not even a JavaScript at all. So our actual JavaScript XML doesn't run on the browser. Behind the scene, there is a tool called Webpack. During the build process, our entire application got converted into a format called ES5 format, which works seamlessly in any browser, including the older versions of Internet Explorer. Of course, we would like to keep a benchmark of IE 10 and above. However, if you want, you can also compile your code to the older versions of ES, such as ES4 as well. So we don't generally do that, but it is a possibility. Because we are using the React.js application, our application is automatically a cross-browser application. Number 7, page transitions don't feel like they block on the internet. Now this is automatically achieved when we created our single page application. You can see that our application doesn't actually load or repaint the whole page when we move from one link to another, and this is all because of the single page application. In addition to that, one of the strengths of React.js is working with virtual DOM. So the virtual DOM is a smaller footprint of a copy or a replica of the real DOM. So all the operations happen over there without having to render the UI. And once there is a real requirement of changing the UI, the virtual DOM is synchronized to the real DOM, and only the changes would be reflected over there, making our application very much like a desktop-like one. So because of React.js, the point number 7 is already addressed. And the last one says each page has a URL. Even though we are working with a single page application, we still have different URLs to identify different components of our application. For example, this is a URL for the home page, whereas if I'm searching for a movie here, and you can see that this is a URL that I can just share it to someone, and they can just open their browser and then go to that link, and they should see the exact same content as I. Similarly, if I'm clicking on one of the movie, you'll see that there is a URL for that also. And if I share this URL to someone and they can access that URL and see the exact same result as what I see here. So every page has a distinct URL that can be bookmarked or shared to someone else. And that is what actually the point number 8 of PWA is all about. So that's all for this lecture. In the subsequent lectures, let's convert our application into a progressive web application step by step. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's create an icon for our movie browser application. And you can create an image using any tool that you're comfortable with. Now, I don't want to go with more complicated tools like Photoshop or Illustrator, etc. from Adobe. I just want to keep it very, very simple. I'm using here something called Keynote, which is equivalent of Microsoft PowerPoint on Windows. So you can do that, or you can use any image that's available on the internet. If you want to skip this, please go ahead and do the same thing. So at the end of this particular lecture, I would have simply created an image and then convert that image into the icons that we want for our progressive web application. The first thing that I want to do is to go to the document properties of this particular presentation. The slide size here, it says standard 4:3. I can customize this to a pixel which is 512 by 512, and that's all what I am going to do. And I don't need this double click to edit placeholders. In fact, I can change the master to a blank one, or I could have simply deleted that. So the first thing I'm going to do is to make this background look black. So that's the first thing, easiest one. And then I'm going to add a white color shape over here to this corner, make it a little smaller, convert that into a white background. So there you go. And I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Command D, and I have a second one. I'm going to select both of them, do another duplicate, and this process, I think I'm going to repeat this for till I go cross this particular one. I think I can add one more over here, so let's just add it like this, and probably I can shift this a bit like this. Basically what I'm trying to do is to make it look like a film roll. So one more duplicate and then add this at this particular side. So this should be good. And I just want to add here the letters M and B for movie browser. So I'm going to add a text, and the text is in a black color by default. So let's add here M capital, B small. I can't see that because it's black. So I'm going to change the text color to let's say white, or probably a cyan. Increase the font size to, say, for example, let's try 100. See how that, so 100 is not enough, so I'm going to go and make it as 200. Should be okay. So I'm going to just rotate that probably a bit, something like this. And my icon now is ready. This is what I wanted. All I have to do now is to export this to an image as a JPEG file. I'll call this as MB and say export. So it's on documents, so it is done. So let's see the image. I'm going to minimize this, and then I go to a new finder, and under document you can see MB, and there's a mb.001.jpg, and it's a 512 by 512, and it's a nice icon we created in a few minutes. We have this JPEG file, but we want to convert this into an icon of different sizes. Like a fave icon, for example, will be of 16 by 16, 32 by 32, 64 by 64, and so on. For mobile applications, when it is added to home screen, it will require a different size. To convert our JPEG file into icons, let's go to the browser and visit a website called realfaveicongenerator.net. Now, this is one of many websites available to create such fave icons. And all I have to do is to select my image, which is under documents. That's the image that I have. And now that's going to upload that and generate varieties of files for me. So as you can see, this is how it's going to look like on browser. On a dark theme, this is how it's going to look like, which is okay for me. On a desktop, this is how it's going to look like. On a mobile, this is how it's going to look like. There is also some customization to some extent you can make if you want that to be a rounded radius and stuff like that. I don't want to do any of these changes. I want to leave it everything to default. So this is how it's going to look like on an iOS device, on an Android mobile phone. If you have a Microsoft phone, that's how it's going to look like. Of course, all of these are customizable. I hope you will play around with the same. And somewhere at the bottom, you have an option to generate your fave icons and HTML code. Let's click on that. It's actually generating on the background, and in a minute I will get a link here to download that zip file. So here is my favicon package. I'm going to download the same thing onto the documents folder again, where we have our other actual file. So I click on save, and now we have the favicon.zip generated. Let's unzip the same thing and go to the documents folder. So here is my favicon package, which consists of all the files, and the important ones for us is the 192 PNG. There is a 512 by 512 PNG, Apple Touch icon.png. That's important for Apple devices. There is a favicon. I think this is the only one that I'm going to use, but if you want, you can also use others as well. So this is the one that contains 48 by 48 size. Effectively, I need the first one, second one, third one, and the favicon.ico file. So these are the different files that I want, I can copy these things and then go to my application which is on desktop, React demo, and there is a public, and I can actually dump all the files over here itself. You can see that there is already a default favicon.ico. I don't need that. There is a logo 192. I don't need that. There's a logo 512. I don't need them. So I'm going to delete them by right click and say move to bin. And then I'm also going to paste my files that I copied from the other folder. Now that we have got our icons required for our application, in the next lecture, let's see how to use them in the manifest.json. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's have a closer look at the manifest.json which is available over here. And the manifest.json allows us to customize our application's behavior on a mobile device. So here is a short name for our application. Of course, this is definitely not the one that we want. We want to call this as movie browser. The same name I can give it for the actual full name also. So I'm going to paste the same thing. If you want, you can have a different name like MB for this and then movie browser over here. The different sets of icons required for our applications are favicon.ico. For all these versions, it's going to use this. Now, remember, the favicon is directly under our public folder. If I had copied them under a folder called icons, then I have to give a absolute or relative path from the public folder. In my case, it is there in the public folder, so I'm going to leave that as it is. The second one is a 192 by 192 file, which we now have a file called android-chrome-192 by 192.png. If you want, you can rename this itself as logo 192, or you can add the name over here. So I'm going to type this as android-chrome-192x192. That's the name. A similar name is also given to this logo 512. So let's say this is 512. So now we have these two files updated. Our application is ready. Just before this, let's also have a look at the index.html. So in the index.html, if you see, there is a link to an Apple Touch icon, which says that, hey, wherever the public URL, that happens to be your localhost :3000 or the one that we are deployed on Firebase. So it's actual public URL and it takes logo 192. So that is what it is taking. In our case, we have a separate file called appletouchicon.png. So I have to change this one to Apple Touch icon. So that's all the changes that we require to make as far as icons are concerned. In the next lecture, let's enable our ServiceWorker and see what it's capable of. Welcome back. In this lecture, let's have a look at our ServiceWorker JS and enable the same thing so our offline caching is taken care of. A service worker is basically a JavaScript file that runs in background and assists in offline first web application development. A service worker cannot directly interact with the web page, nor it can directly access the DOM, as it runs on a different thread but can communicate with the web pages through something called messages. One of the key points you have to keep in mind is that the service workers have been designed to be fully asynchronous. As a result of this, if you are trying to use synchronous XML HTTP request or local storage, they can't be used inside a service worker script. But since it is working on a different thread, it doesn't block your application anyways. Service workers are terminated when they are not in use and restored when they are required. It acts as a programmable network proxy, allowing developers to handle how network requests from web page is handled. So the developers can take appropriate action based on the availability of the network. One of the great features about service workers are that they are designed to handle network requests and assist in offline first development. So to register a service worker, we first have to check if the browser supports it, and then we have to register. Now if you look at the serviceworker.js that we have here, the function register with an optional config object over here is trying to do the same thing. And one of the things that you can see here is that there is a function called check valid service worker, and that function is defined right below that somewhere here, you can see. And all it's doing is it's checking whether your browser supports this particular service worker or not. And the service worker registration lifecycle contains 3 steps: download, install, and activate. A service worker is downloaded when a user accesses the web page, and installation is done if the file is found to be new. Now that means that this entire registration happens only one time. After that, it is immediately activated. So to make use of this ServiceWorker.js, we don't have to do a single piece of change over here. All I have to do is to go to the index.js and then change this function from unregistered to register, save this, and now we are good to go. Of course, according to the React.js documentation, this particular service worker has some pitfalls which you can improvise. So there are many articles and tutorials as how you can create your own service workers, but for the sake of demonstration, this service worker definitely works. So that's all for this lecture. In the next lecture, let's redeploy and re-evaluate our application against PWA. Welcome back. Now that our application is ready with service workers, favicons, manifest.json, everything, we're going to create a production build again and redeploy that on our Firebase. So let's go ahead with that. First, let's make sure that we are in the project directory, which I am right now in. And then I'm going to type here npm run build, and that's going to create a production build. And now that it is done, I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to type here firebase deploy. And this is going to ship all the content of the build folder to the Firebase hosting. The deployment is complete. I'm going to copy this URL and then go back to the browser and then replace this URL with the one that I copied. I'm going to press enter, and now you can see we have a new icon over here. We can also check here that there is a plus icon on the right side of your address bar which says install movie browser, and you can see the title here coming from the manifest.json. We can do an install. When I click on this install, what it does is it's going to add to my Chrome applications, and note that it came as a separate standalone window. So it has been disconnected from the browser and it works as if it's a separate application itself. So we can work on all the things that we have worked earlier. For example, I can look for a movie, let's say Mission, and then press enter. We should get movies with the title Mission in it. And I'm going to click on this, and I still have that loading image and the details of the movie that's coming up. So this is an application by itself. Of course, we still have an option over here to say open in Chrome or copy the URL, uninstall movie browser, few options that come up automatically over here. Anyway, so I'm going to just exit out of this and then visit our application in the browser, which is called React.js moviebrowser.firebaseapp.com. Now that we have here, we can press Option Command I or F12 on Chrome, and we got this audit tool over here, which is our Lighthouse audit tool. We don't want anything other than the progressive web app this time, so I'm going to untick all of them, and then I'm only going to leave the progressive web app. So when I click on the generate report this time, you should see now that our application is a 100% progressive web application. To verify whether it works offline or not, what I can do is I can go and disable my Wi-Fi. I'm going to turn off my Wi-Fi, and so no Wi-Fi right now. If I do a page reload, you should still see the content and not anything else. If you are on, for example, a different tab and then try to visit some other website, for example, if I try to go to say facebook.com, it says no internet, but my application has absolutely no problem. So I can copy this URL, paste it in a different tab, press enter. You can see that our application still works. However, what doesn't work is if I search for a movie like Thor, I may not get any output. We still have the common look and feel of our application. It is not giving something like no internet over here. So since our application has been installed, you can also check the same thing by going to Chrome:/apps. And you should now see that there is a movie browser application that is readily available over here, apart from other applications here. Of course, they're all grayed out because I don't have internet connection, but I still should be able to access the same thing by clicking on that, and you can see it just comes up as a separate application. On Mac OS, you can also press Command spacebar to open what is called as the Spotlight, and then you should be able to say movie browser, and that should come up automatically like that. Let's also try opening the same thing on a mobile device, and I am on my Android phone over here. So I'm going to go open Chrome and then visit the website react.js-movie-browser.firebase-app.com. When I select that, you can see now that I got an option here to add movie browser to home screen. If I click on that, it's going to now ask me once again, add to home screen. I click on add, and now it is adding to our home screen. After scanning, and it's done now, it has been installed. So I can now go back to my screen, and you can see that there is a movie browser application icon. When I click on this, you can see it's going to launch that initial home page with an icon as well as movie browser title. And then I have an application that's coming up right here. I can search for movies, let's say, for example, Spider, and then say search. I should get the list of all the movies, just like the previous ones, one below the other. And tapping on one of the movie should give me the details of that movie quickly. I can click on the back button to go back and select a different movie, and you can see the loading icon as well as the actual details of the movie as well. So it is an application by itself. It's not running on the browser. You can see that the Chrome is over here. I'm going to exit the Chrome, and I'm going to exit our application also. Now, at any point in time, if you feel that you don't want the application, you can just long press the icon, and that comes with an uninstall option, and you can now release that on that to do an actual uninstall of your application as well. So you can see that application has been uninstalled. So this is how it works or behaves on a mobile device. So that's all for this particular lecture.